The wind came down from the mountains like something with teeth. It scraped across the wooden buildings of Coldridge, rattling shutters and sending dust devils spinning through the main street where 24 people had gathered without really meaning to. Word traveled fast in a town of 300 souls. Marcus Caldwell was going to propose. Publicly. To Alara Voss, the seamstress who worked above the general store and kept to herself like keeping to yourself was a religion. Alara stood there in a plain gray dress, her dark hair pulled back tight enough to give her a headache, hands folded in front of her like she was waiting for bad news. Marcus faced her with his hat in one hand and a small velvet box in the other. He wasn't a bad-looking man. Tall, broad-shouldered, probably 45 with silver threading through his brown hair. He owned the Caldwell Ranch, 15,000 acres of grazing land and cattle, a house with glass windows, hired men who answered when he called. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice carrying across the square like he'd practiced it. "I know you value your independence. I respect that. But a woman alone in this country faces hardships no one should bear. I'm offering you my protection, my home, and my name. I'm asking you to marry me." He opened the box. The ring caught the afternoon light, a thin band of gold with a small stone that probably cost more than Alara made in 6 months. The silence stretched. Someone coughed. A horse stamped its hoof against the hitching post outside the saloon. Alara looked at the ring, then at Marcus, then at the faces watching from every doorway and window along the street. "No," she said. The word hung there like smoke. Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No, I won't marry you." His smile flickered but held. "I understand this is sudden. Perhaps you'd like time to—" "I don't need time. The answer is no." She didn't say it loud, didn't shout or make a scene, but her voice carried, clear and final, and the effect was immediate. Whispers started like fire in dry grass. Marcus's face went from confident to confused to something harder. He closed the box with a snap that sounded too loud. "May I ask why?" His tone had changed, still polite, but colder. "Because I don't want to be married," Alara said. "Not to you, not to anyone. I have work. I have a life. I don't need saving. You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's mine to make." Marcus stared at her for 3 long seconds, then he put his hat back on, pocketed the ring, and walked away without another word. His boots struck the boardwalk hard enough to echo. The crowd didn't disperse. They stood there staring at Alara like she'd grown a second head. Mrs. Brennan, the banker's wife, had her hand pressed to her chest like she'd witnessed a murder. Thomas Greer, who ran the mercantile where Alara rented her room, looked at her with something between shock and disgust. Alara turned and walked back toward the store. The whispers followed her like wolves. By sundown, the whole town knew. By the next morning, the damage was done. Alara woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots. More than one pair. She sat up in the narrow bed, still dressed in yesterday's clothes because she'd been too tired to change. The footsteps stopped outside her door. A knock, sharp, impatient. "Miss Voss, it's Thomas Greer. Open the door." She stood, smoothed her hair back, and opened it. Greer stood there with 2 men behind him, both ranch hands from the Brennan place, neither one looking happy to be there. "Mr. Greer, I need you out by noon," he said. No preamble, no apology. "Out?" "This room, the space you rent, I need it back. I paid through the end of the month. I'm refunding your money. You can collect it downstairs." He handed her an envelope. "I can't have you here anymore. It's bad for business." She looked past him at the 2 ranch hands. "You brought muscle to evict a seamstress?" Greer's jaw tightened. "Just making sure there's no trouble." "There won't be." "Good. Noon, Miss Voss." He turned and left. The ranch hands followed, but one of them glanced back at her with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Alara closed the door and stood there for a minute, listening to her own breathing. Then she started packing. She didn't own much. 2 dresses, a coat, a spare pair of boots that needed new soles, sewing supplies, a few books, a tin cup and plate, a blanket. Everything fit into a single canvas bag and a wooden case for her sewing kit. She counted the money in the envelope. It was short by $3, but she didn't bother arguing. By 11:30, she was standing on the street with her bag and case, watching people avoid looking at her. A woman crossed to the other side of the road rather than walk past her. Two children stared until their mother grabbed them and pulled them along, hissing something Alara couldn't hear but could guess. She walked to the diner. Maybe she could get coffee and think through her next move. The door was locked. A handwritten sign hung in the window, closed for private event. There was no event. Alara could see Mrs. Kohler inside, wiping down tables. Their eyes met through the glass. Mrs. Kohler looked away first and disappeared into the back. Alara tried the saloon next. The bartender, a man named Pete, who'd always been friendly enough, stopped her at the door. "Sorry, Alara, can't serve you." "Why not?" "Boss's orders." "Your boss is a drunk who hasn't left his office in 2 weeks." Pete shrugged. "Still his place. Still his orders." She walked away before he could say anything else that might make her lose her temper. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. The general store sold her some jerky, hard biscuits, and a canteen of water. The clerk didn't speak to her, just took her money and put the goods on the counter like she might be contagious. Alara ate standing in the alley behind the store, chewing jerky that tasted like salted leather and watching the town move around her like she was invisible. She'd known it would be bad. She hadn't expected it to be immediate. In a place like Coldridge, reputation wasn't just important, it was currency. People built their lives on it. You could be poor, you could be rough, you could even be mean, but as long as the community accepted you, you survived. Step outside that circle and you were done. Alara had stepped so far outside the circle she couldn't see it anymore. The problem wasn't just that she'd said no, it was who she'd said it to and how she'd done it. Marcus Caldwell wasn't just rich, he was connected. His family had been in the territory since before statehood. He sat on the town council. He donated to the church, sponsored the 4th of July picnic, hired locally when he could. Refusing him publicly was like spitting in the face of the entire social order. And worse, she'd done it for no good reason. Not because he was cruel or drunk or dangerous, just because she didn't want to marry him. That terrified people. Because if Alara Voss could refuse Marcus Caldwell for no reason other than personal choice, what did that say about all the other choices people made? All the marriages that happened because they were practical or necessary or expected? All the compromises and sacrifices? She was dangerous, not because of what she'd done, but because of what she represented. By mid-afternoon, Alara had a plan. Not a good plan, but a plan. There were 3 ranches within a day's walk that sometimes hired on seasonal help. She'd offer to work as a cook or housekeeper. She could sew, mend, clean, cook basic meals. She wasn't asking for charity, just work. Fair pay for fair labor. The first ranch was the Double K, run by a man named Keller, who had a reputation for being tough but fair. She walked 4 miles through scrub brush and dry creek beds, arrived dusty and tired, and knocked on the ranch house door. Keller answered. He was in his 60s, grizzled and bow-legged, with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. "Mr. Keller, my name is—" "I know who you are." He cut her off without malice, just stating fact. "And I can't help you. I'm not asking for charity. I'll work. I'm a good cook, I can mend. I'm sure you can. But I can't hire you." "Why not?" He scratched his jaw, considering whether to be honest. Finally, he sighed. "Because Caldwell does business with me. Buys stock, lends equipment, covers me when I'm short on capital. I hire you. I lose that relationship. I can't afford to lose it. So you're turning me away because of him. I'm turning you away because I got 15 men depending on this place to keep running. I don't like it, but that's the math." He started to close the door, then paused. "There's one place that might take you. Iron Ridge Ranch, 20 miles east, run by a man named Kane. He doesn't do business with Caldwell, doesn't do business with anyone much. Rough outfit, rough men, rough country. But if you're desperate enough, it's worth a try." The door closed. Alara stood there for a moment, then turned and started walking. The second ranch turned her away before she finished introducing herself. The foreman saw her coming and met her at the gate. "Not hiring. Move along." "I haven't even asked." "Don't need to. Word's out. You're poison right now. Best thing you can do is leave the territory entirely." "I'm not leaving." "Then you're a fool." She walked away from that one angry. Not at him, at the whole rotten situation, at the way a single choice could turn your entire life inside out. At the way people talked about independence and freedom, but punished you the second you tried to claim it. The sun was starting to drop toward the horizon when she stopped to rest and reassess. 20 miles east to a ranch run by a man nobody did business with. That could mean he was principled and independent, or it could mean he was impossible to work with. Either way, it was the only option left. She checked her supplies. Enough food for 2 days if she stretched it. Water for less than that. The smart thing would be to head back to Coldridge, sleep somewhere under cover, and start fresh in the morning. But going back to Coldridge meant facing those stairs again, meant hearing the whispers, meant walking past women who clutched their children like Alara might corrupt them by proximity. She kept walking east. Night caught her in open country. No trees, no shelter, just rolling grassland and the occasional rocky outcrop. The temperature dropped fast once the sun was gone. She found a spot against some rocks that blocked the worst of the wind, wrapped herself in her blanket and tried to sleep. It didn't work. Too cold, too exposed, too aware of every sound. Coyotes in the distance, the wind moving through the grass like something breathing. Once, she heard what might have been a cougar scream, high and awful, far enough away that she told herself it wasn't a threat. She thought about Marcus Caldwell's offer, a warm house, a soft bed, security. She thought about the look on his face when she'd said no. She didn't regret it. Even sitting here freezing in the dark with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, she didn't regret it. That had to count for something. Dawn came gray and cold. Alara's hands were numb, her back ached, and her face felt like leather from the wind. She ate a piece of jerky, drank some water, and started walking again. The landscape didn't change much. Grass, rocks, distant mountains that never seemed to get closer. A hawk circled overhead for a while, probably hoping she'd die and provide breakfast. Around midday, she saw smoke, thin line rising straight up in the still air. She adjusted her course toward it. An hour later, she crested a low rise and saw Iron Ridge Ranch spread out in the shallow valley below. It wasn't much. A main house that looked like it had been added onto piecemeal over the years, each addition in a slightly different style. A bunkhouse, a barn that leaned a little to the left, some corrals, a few outbuildings. Everything looked functional but worn, like it had been built to last and then tested hard. A dozen horses in the corral. Maybe 20 head of cattle visible in the near pasture. Smoke coming from the cookhouse chimney. Alara took a breath and walked down the slope toward the ranch. She was 50 yards from the main house when a man stepped out onto the porch. Tall, lean, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and a face that looked like it didn't smile much. He wore work clothes, denim pants, a faded shirt, scuffed boots, and a gun belt with a revolver that had seen use. He watched her approach without saying anything. Alara stopped at the base of the porch steps. "I'm looking for Mr. Kane." "You found him." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "My name is Alara Voss. I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, mend, sew. I'll work hard and I don't cause trouble." Kane looked her over. Not in a crude way, just assessing, taking in the dust on her dress, the worn boots, the canvas bag, the fact that she'd clearly walked a long way. "You're the woman who turned down Caldwell." Not a question. "Yes." "Why?" "That's personal. Not if I'm considering hiring you. Caldwell's got reach. Hiring you might bring problems I don't need." Alara met his eyes. "I turned him down because I didn't want to marry him. That's all. I didn't steal from him, didn't wrong him, didn't lie to him. I just said no. If that's enough to make me unemployable, then the problem isn't me." Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then he glanced past her toward the cookhouse. "You say you can cook?" "Yes. Current cook quit 3 days ago, left in the middle of the night without notice. Men are taking turns and doing a bad job of it. Food's been terrible, and everyone's angry." He looked back at her. "You want the job, it's yours. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. Room's a corner of the cookhouse, not private. Works hard. Men are rough. This isn't a finishing school. I'm not looking for a finishing school. You'll take orders from me and from Garrett. He's my foreman. You'll keep the cookhouse clean, meals ready on time, and you won't cause drama with the hands." "Understood. And if Caldwell or anyone from Coldridge shows up making trouble, you deal with it yourself. I'm not running a sanctuary." "I don't need sanctuary. I need work." Kane studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Come on, I'll show you the cookhouse." He stepped off the porch and walked toward the low building where the smoke was coming from. Alara followed, her bag heavy on her shoulder and her heart pounding harder than the walk should have caused. The cookhouse was basic: one large room with a wood stove, a long table with benches, shelves for supplies, hooks for pots and pans. In the back corner, a straw mattress on a wooden frame with a wool blanket and a curtain that could be pulled for minimal privacy. "Stove's temperamental," Kane said. "Burns hot on the left, barely heats on the right. You'll figure it out. Supplies are in the shed out back: flour, lard, coffee, whatever we've got. You need something we don't have, tell me, and I'll see about getting it on the next supply run." He pointed to the corner. "That's yours. Breakfast at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Miss a meal and the men get cranky. Get them drunk or poisoned and I'll fire you on the spot." "Understood." "Questions?" "How many men?" 12, including me and Garrett. Could be more if we hire on for branding or roundup, but right now it's 12. "Any dietary restrictions? Allergies?" Kane almost smiled. "Almost. This is a cattle ranch. We eat meat. Anything else is a bonus." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Garrett and some of the hands are out checking fence lines. They'll be back by dinner. Might want to make a decent first impression." Then he was gone. Elara stood in the middle of the cookhouse, surrounded by the smell of old grease and wood smoke, and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like the absence of immediate panic. She had a job, a place to sleep, a purpose. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She dropped her bag in the corner, hung up her coat, and got to work. The kitchen was a disaster. Pots with burnt residue caked on the bottom, grease everywhere, flour spilled and left to harden. A rat had gotten into the bread box and left droppings. The coffee pot smelled like something had died in it. Elara rolled up her sleeves. She started with the stove, scraping off layers of burnt food and grease until her arms ached. Then she scrubbed the pots with sand and lye soap until her hands were raw. She swept the floor, wiped down the shelves, checked the supplies. The shed out back was better organized than she'd expected. Sacks of flour and beans, a barrel of salted pork, jars of preserves, some sorry-looking potatoes starting to sprout, coffee, sugar, lard. Not a lot of variety, but enough to work with. She planned the evening meal. Needed to be substantial. These were working men who burned through calories like firewood. Needed to be edible. First impressions mattered, and needed to be ready by 6, which gave her about 3 hours. She settled on beans cooked with salt pork, cornbread, and fried potatoes. Simple, filling, hard to screw up. She got the beans soaking, got the stove going properly, mixed the cornbread batter. While the beans cooked, she cut the potatoes and set them aside in water so they wouldn't brown. At 5:30, she heard voices and boots, the men coming back. She kept working, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. The door opened and 4 men walked in, bringing cold air and the smell of horses with them. They stopped when they saw her. The first one was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and a gray beard. He looked her up and down without much expression. "You the new cook?" "I am." "Garrett Hayes, foreman." He jerked his thumb at the others. "This is Cole, Ben, and Dutch." The 3 men nodded. Cole was young, maybe 20, with sandy hair and a nervous energy. Ben was broad and dark-haired, probably mid-30s. Dutch was lean and quiet, with eyes that didn't seem to miss much. "Dinner ready?" Garrett asked. 20 minutes. "Smells better than anything we've had all week." He moved to the long table and sat down, the others following his lead. Over the next 10 minutes, the rest of the crew filtered in. They came in groups of 2 or 3, all dirty and tired, all surprised to see a woman in the cookhouse. Kane came in last, took a seat at the head of the table, and waited. Elara served the food: beans in bowls, cornbread on plates, fried potatoes piled on a platter in the middle of the table, coffee in tin cups, black and strong. The men ate without talking much, just the sounds of spoons on bowls and the occasional request to pass something. Elara stood by the stove, watching, waiting for a complaint or criticism. It didn't come. Cole finished first, sopping up the last of his beans with cornbread. He looked at Garrett. "Can I say something?" "Go ahead. This is the best meal I've had in 6 months." A few of the men grunted agreement. Ben nodded. Dutch gave her a brief look that might have been approval. Kane caught her eye. "Good work." 2 words, but they mattered. Garrett stood up, stretched. "All right, everyone done? Get your dishes to the basin and clear out. We got early start tomorrow. The men filed out, leaving their bowls and cups by the wash basin. Kane lingered for a moment. You settling in all right? Yes, sir. Drop the sir. Kane's fine. He paused. You did good tonight. Keep it up, and we won't have problems. Thank you. He left. Alara stood in the empty cookhouse, surrounded by dirty dishes and the lingering smell of cornbread, and felt something she hadn't felt in days. Not quite hope, but close enough. The first week was a test. Not the kind anyone talked about, but the kind everyone knew was happening. Alara woke before dawn every day, got the stove going, made coffee strong enough to strip paint. Breakfast was biscuits and gravy, sometimes eggs if the chickens were laying, sometimes fried salt pork. The men ate fast and left faster. Lunch was simpler, sandwiches or leftover stew or beans with cornbread. Dinner was the main event. Stew, roast when they had it, potatoes a dozen different ways, whatever she could make with the supplies on hand. She kept the kitchen clean, scrubbed the table after every meal, swept the floor twice a day, washed the laundry, dish towels, aprons, the occasional shirt someone left behind. The men were polite but distant. They said please and thank you, complimented the food, but didn't linger to chat. She was an outsider, a woman in a male space, worse, a woman with a reputation. They were waiting to see if she'd cause trouble. Alara kept her head down and worked. On the fourth day, a young hand named Riley made a comment. Nothing terrible, just a joke about how a woman who turned down a rich man must have high standards. He said it to Cole while they were eating, not directly to her, but loud enough that everyone heard. The room went quiet. Alara kept stirring the stew, didn't react, didn't defend herself, just kept working. Garrett stood up. Riley. The kid looked up. Yeah? Shut up. Riley opened his mouth, thought better of it, and nodded. That was the last comment anyone made. On the sixth day, Ben came in with a torn shirt. Hey, Alara, I know you're not here to play seamstress, but if you got a spare minute and some thread, I'd appreciate it. Leave it by the door. I'll have it done by morning. She mended it that night after the dishes were done. Fixed not just the tear, but a loose button and a fraying cuff. When Ben saw it the next morning, he stared at it like she'd worked magic. You didn't have to do all that. It needed doing. Well, thanks. Word spread. By the end of the week, there was a small pile of clothes by the door waiting to be mended. Alara worked on them at night, using the oil lamp and whatever scraps of thread and fabric she could find. She didn't complain, didn't ask for extra pay, just did it. On the eighth day, she met Lena. The girl appeared in the doorway of the cookhouse just before lunch, thin and quiet, maybe 10 years old, with tangled brown hair and a dress that had been patched so many times it was more patches than original fabric. Can I help you? Alara asked. The girl didn't answer, just stood there staring. Alara wiped her hands on her apron. Are you lost? No, ma'am. Do you need something? Mr. Kane said I could come see if you needed help. Alara glanced towards the main house, then back at the girl. What's your name? Lena. I'm Alara. Do you live here? Sort of. My pa works for Mr. Kane. We live in the South Line Shack. Line shacks were small cabins scattered across ranch property where hands stayed during remote work. Not meant for families, just temporary shelter. Does your pa know you're here? He's out with the herd. Alara studied the girl. Too thin. Eyes too wary. The look of a kid who'd learned to stay out of the way. All right, Alara said. You can help if you want. But if you're going to be in my kitchen, you follow my rules. Understand? Lena nodded. Rule 1, wash your hands. Rule 2, do what I tell you. Rule 3, if something's hot or sharp, you ask before touching it. Lena went to the basin and washed her hands without being told twice. For the next 2 hours she worked, peeling potatoes, fetching water, sweeping the floor. She didn't talk much, but she listened and followed directions. When lunch was ready and the men came in, Lena disappeared without a word. She came back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the second week, she was a fixture. Quiet, helpful, always underfoot, but never in the way. Alara didn't mind. The girl reminded her of herself at that age, watchful, self-sufficient, trying to figure out where she fit. The trouble started small. A rider came out from Coldridge on a Sunday carrying a letter from Thomas Greer. It was brief and formal. Alara's sewing work, the repairs and alterations she'd done for half the town, was no longer wanted. Customers had requested their items be returned unfinished. The letter included a list of names and items. Alara read it twice, then burned it in the stove. 2 days later, another rider brought news that the town council had passed a resolution. Any business that hired Alara Voss would be subject to review and potential loss of town contracts. Kane read that one, then crumpled it up and threw it in the fire. They can't actually enforce that, he said. Maybe not, but they can make things difficult. Let them try. But the pressure kept building. Garrett came back from a supply run with stories. People in Coldridge were talking, saying Alara was dangerous, saying she'd corrupted morals and needed to be run out of the territory, saying Kane was a fool for hiring her. They're scared, Garrett said. He was talking to Kane, but Alara was in the room preparing dinner. She pretended not to listen. Woman refusing a good offer like that, it shakes people, makes them question things. That's their problem, Kane said. Sure, but their problem becomes our problem if they decide to push it. Alara kept chopping vegetables, kept her mouth shut. That night, she lay in her corner of the cookhouse and stared at the ceiling. She'd known there would be consequences. She hadn't realized how far people would go to enforce conformity. She thought about leaving, just packing her bag and walking away. Maybe heading west to one of the bigger towns where nobody knew her name. But the thought stuck in her throat like bad meat. She hadn't done anything wrong. All she'd done was make a choice about her own life. If she ran now, she'd be running forever. 3 weeks in, Lena showed up with a black eye. Alara saw it immediately. The girl tried to hide it, turning her face away, but Alara caught her chin gently and tilted her head to the light. Who did this? Nobody. Lena. I fell. You didn't fall. The girl pulled away and went to the wash basin, started scrubbing potatoes with more force than necessary. Alara let it drop for the moment. But after lunch, when the girl was getting ready to leave, she stopped her. If someone's hurting you, you can tell me. Lena's jaw tightened. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Some kids from town came out yesterday, said things. I said things back, got in a fight. What kind of things did they say? Doesn't matter. But Alara could guess. The kids had probably heard their parents talking, heard about the wicked woman who refused Marcus Caldwell and corrupted decent society. Heard that Lena was spending time with her, and Lena had defended her. Alara felt something crack in her chest. You don't have to fight for me, she said quietly. Lena looked at her with eyes older than 10 years had any right to be. You fight for yourself. Why can't I? Because you're a kid. It's different. No, it ain't. She left before Alara could respond. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that bruise, kept thinking about a 10-year-old girl getting hurt because she associated with the wrong person. The next morning, she made a decision. She found Kane in the barn, checking on a horse with a bad hoof. I need to talk to you. He looked up. What's wrong? Lena got in a fight with some town kids. They were saying things about me. She defended me and got hurt. Kane's expression darkened. She all right? Physically, yes, but this is going to keep happening. The town's not going to let this go. And now they're going after a child. What are you asking me to do? Nothing. I'm telling you I'm going into town. I'm going to face this head on. Kane stood up slowly. That's a bad idea. Probably. But hiding out here isn't working either. They're escalating. First it was letters and resolutions. Now it's kids getting hurt. I need to make it clear I'm not leaving and I'm not backing down. They'll tear you apart. Maybe. But at least they'll do it to my face instead of through a 10-year-old. Kane studied her for a long moment. You're stubborn. So I've been told. When do you want to go? Tomorrow, early. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I'm not asking. His tone left no room for argument. You want to walk into that town and make a stand? Fine. But you're not doing it alone. Alara felt something unexpected, gratitude mixed with relief. She nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This might make things worse. Can't get much worse. Kane smiled grimly. You'd be surprised. They rode into Coldridge just after dawn. Alara on a borrowed horse, Kane on his own. The town was just waking up, Smoke rising from chimneys, a few people moving on the boardwalks. The sight of Alara Voss riding down Main Street with Kane beside her brought everything to a halt. People stopped and stared. Whispers started immediately. Kane dismounted in front of the general store. Alara followed. They tied the horses and Kane turned to face the growing crowd. "We're here to talk," he said. His voice carried. "Anyone got something to say it now." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus Caldwell stepped out of the bank across the street. He looked the same, well-dressed, confident, in control. But when he saw Alara, something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or hurt disguised as anger. "You've got nerve coming back here," he said. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Alara replied. "I'm here because what's happening isn't right. You're going after people who associate with me, including children. That's not justice. That's cruelty. You brought this on yourself. I made a personal choice. That doesn't give you the right to destroy my life or hurt people around me." Marcus walked closer, stopped a few feet away. "You humiliated me. In front of the entire town. I said no to a marriage proposal. That's not humiliation. That's an answer you didn't like. You could have said it privately. You asked publicly." The crowd was growing. Mrs. Brennan appeared, along with Thomas Greer and several others. The sheriff, a tired-looking man named Dutch Morrow, pushed through to the front. "All right, everyone calm down," he said. "Miss Voss, Mr. Kane, you've made your point. Maybe it's time to head back." "Not until this is settled," Alara said. "Settled how?" Marcus demanded. "You want an apology? You want us to pretend you didn't spit in the face of decency? I want you to leave me alone, and I want you to stop punishing people for treating me like a human being. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work, Marcus?" Her voice rose, carrying across the square. "I didn't steal from you, didn't lie to you, didn't break any law. I just chose not to marry you. If that's enough to make me an outcast, then this town is more broken than I thought." Silence. Then a voice from the crowd. A woman Alara didn't recognize. "She's got a point." Someone else. "Maybe we've been too hard on her." But Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, face tight with disapproval. "She rejected a good man's offer for no reason. That shows poor character." "It shows independence," another voice said. Alara couldn't see who. The crowd was fracturing, some people nodding in agreement with Mrs. Brennan, others looking uncertain. Marcus held up a hand. "Enough. This isn't a debate." He looked at Alara. "You made your choice. Now live with the consequences." "I am living with them. But I won't let you drag innocent people into this." "Then leave. Go somewhere else. Start over." "No." That one word hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus's expression hardened. "Then we're done here." He turned to the crowd. "Anyone who does business with this woman or the people who employ her will answer to me. That's not a threat. It's a fact." He walked away. The crowd began to disperse, some people throwing dark looks at Alara, others looking uncomfortable. The sheriff approached. "Miss Voss, I suggest you head back before this gets worse." Is he allowed to threaten people like that? He didn't threaten anyone. He stated an intention. That's different. Morrow sighed. "Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but I can't arrest a man for being vindictive. Best thing you can do is keep your head down and wait for it to blow over. And if it doesn't blow over, then you've got a hard road ahead." Alara and Kane rode back to Iron Ridge in silence. When they arrived, Garrett was waiting. "How'd it go?" "About as well as expected," Kane said. Alara dismounted, handed over the reins. "Thank you for coming with me." "Did it help?" "No, but at least now they know I'm not running." She walked to the cookhouse and started preparing lunch. Her hands were shaking, but she kept working. Lena showed up an hour later. She didn't say anything, just started helping. Alara let her. That night, after the men had eaten and left, after the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, Alara sat on the back step of the cookhouse and looked up at the stars. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The confrontation in Coldridge changed things, but not the way Alara hoped. If anything, Marcus Caldwell doubled down. Within a week, 2 of Kane's regular suppliers sent letters saying they couldn't do business anymore. No explanation, just polite refusals and apologies that rang hollow. Kane didn't panic. He found new suppliers, paid more, waited longer for deliveries, but the message was clear. Associating with Ilara Voss came with a price. The men at Iron Ridge noticed. They didn't say much, but Ilara caught the looks, the quiet calculations. She was costing them money and convenience, and sooner or later that was going to matter. She worked harder, rose earlier, stayed up later, made sure every meal was worth eating, fixed things that didn't need fixing just to prove her value, mended clothes, organized the supply shed, scrubbed floors that were already clean. Garrett watched her one morning as she hauled water from the well for the third time before breakfast. "You trying to work yourself to death?" "Just doing my job." "Your job's cooking, not trying to be 3 people. If I don't pull my weight, someone's going to decide I'm not worth the trouble." He scratched his beard, considering. "You're already worth the trouble. Food's good, kitchen's clean, men aren't complaining. That's more than the last 2 cooks managed combined." The last 2 cooks didn't come with the town trying to destroy their employer. True. But Kane knew what he was getting into when he hired you. He's not the kind to back down from pressure. Everyone has a breaking point. Maybe, but you haven't found his yet. Garrett picked up 2 of the water buckets. "Come on, I'll help. Breakfast won't cook itself." Small moments like that kept her going. Not grand gestures or speeches, just quiet support from people who didn't owe her anything. Lena kept showing up every day. The bruise around her eye faded to yellow-green, then disappeared. But she was quieter than before, more watchful. She worked without being asked, anticipated what Ilara needed before being told. One afternoon, while they were peeling potatoes, Ilara asked, "How's your father?" "He's fine." "Does he know you come here?" "Yeah." "And he's all right with it?" Lena shrugged. "He doesn't care much what I do long as I stay out of trouble." "What about school?" "Ain't no school out here. Used to go in Coldridge sometimes, but—" She trailed off. "But now you can't because of me." "I didn't like it anyway. Teacher was mean." Ilara set down her knife. "Lena, I need you to understand something. People are going to judge you for spending time with me. They already are. If that's going to cause problems for you, you don't have to keep coming." The girl looked up, jaw set. "You saying you don't want me here?" "I'm saying I don't want you getting hurt because of me." "I'm not hurt." "You had a black eye." "That was my choice. I chose to fight those kids. They said you were a whore, and I punched Jimmy Brennan in the mouth. I'd do it again." The casual way she said it, the certainty, hit Ilara harder than she expected. "That's not a fight you need to have." "Maybe not, but it's one I'm having anyway." Lena went back to peeling potatoes. "You're the only person in this whole territory who treats me like I'm worth something. I'm not giving that up because people are stupid." Ilara didn't know what to say to that, so she just kept working, and Lena did the same, and the silence between them was comfortable. That evening, after dinner, one of the hands, a man named Frank who'd been with Kane for years, approached her. He was older, weathered, with a scar across his left cheek and hands that had seen hard labor. "Miss Voss, got a question." "Go ahead." "You any good with numbers?" "Decent enough." "Why?" He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Been trying to figure out how much I'm owed for the last 3 months. Contract says one thing, but the math ain't adding up, and I can't tell if I'm doing it wrong or if there's a mistake." Ilara took the paper, studied it. The handwriting was rough, the numbers scratched out and rewritten multiple times. She sat down at the table, found a pencil, and worked through it. "You're not doing it wrong," she said after a few minutes. "There's a calculation error here. You're owed another $8. Frank squinted at the paper. "You sure?" "Positive. See here. They multiplied wrong. Should be 42, not 34. "Huh." He took the paper back, stared at it like it might change. "I'll be damned. Thanks." "Any time." Word spread faster than a brush fire. By the next evening, 3 more men had arithmetic problems they needed help with. Letters to write, bills to check, a contract one of them couldn't quite parse. Ilara helped them all. It wasn't much, just basic reading and writing and math, but for men who'd spent their lives doing physical labor and never had much schooling, it mattered. She didn't charge anything, didn't make a big deal of it, just helped when asked and went back to her work. But something shifted. The distance between her and the crew started to close. They nodded when she passed, said good morning. Lingered after meals to talk about nothing important, weather, horses, whose turn it was to muck out the barn. She was becoming part of the outfit. Not a woman they tolerated. Not an outsider they were stuck with. Just Alara, who cooked decent food and could explain why their pay stub didn't make sense. Kane noticed. "You're making yourself useful." That was the idea. "Careful. Keep this up and they'll expect you to solve all their problems." "I've got worse problems than that." He almost smiled. Fair point. But Coldridge wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next attack came through the church. Pastor Whitmore, a thin man with a voice like he gargled gravel, gave a sermon about moral decay and the dangers of women who refuse their natural roles. He didn't mention Alara by name, but everyone knew who he meant. Mrs. Brennan repeated choice excerpts to anyone who'd listen. The story grew with each telling until it sounded like Alara was single-handedly destroying the fabric of society. Then came the petition, a formal document calling for the territory to investigate Iron Ridge Ranch for harboring a woman of questionable moral character. It was signed by 43 people, including Marcus Caldwell, Thomas Greer, and half the town council. Kane read it in the kitchen while Alara was making bread. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there with the paper in his hand and his jaw working. "They can't actually do anything with this," he finally said. "It's just noise. Loud noise. Still just noise." But 3 days later, a territorial inspector showed up. His name was Vernon Hayes, no relation to Garrett, and he had the kind of face that looked like it disapproved of everything on principle. He spent 2 days at Iron Ridge, poking around, asking questions, inspecting the bunkhouse and cookhouse and supply shed. He interviewed some of the men. He watched Alara work without speaking to her directly. On the third day, he sat down with Kane in the main house. Alara wasn't invited, but she heard about it later from Garrett. "Inspector says everything's in order," Garrett told her while she was preparing dinner. "Nothing illegal, nothing improper." He did note that having a woman in the cookhouse without separate quarters was irregular, but since you're an employee and not being coerced, there's nothing he can do about it. So that's it? For now. But he also said the petition represents community concern, and that Kane should be aware of the reputational risks of his hiring choices. Alara slammed the knife down harder than she meant to. The cutting board cracked. "Reputational risks, like I'm some kind of disease." "Easy. You're preaching to the choir here." She took a breath, forced her hands to unclench. "Sorry." "Don't be. You got a right to be angry. Anger doesn't solve anything." "Maybe not, but it's honest." That night, Alara lay in her corner and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things anger didn't solve. It didn't change Marcus Caldwell's mind, didn't stop the town from treating her like a threat, didn't protect Lena from getting hurt. But it did keep her moving, kept her from giving up. And right now, that had to be enough. The harassment escalated in small, cruel ways. Someone spread a rumor that Alara was sleeping with the ranch hands. It wasn't true, but truth didn't matter. The rumor took on a life of its own, growing details with each telling. A group of women from Coldridge rode out to Iron Ridge one afternoon, led by Mrs. Brennan. They didn't come to the cookhouse. Instead, they went straight to Kane's office. Alara was in the supply shed when she heard raised voices. She moved closer, staying out of sight. Mrs. Brennan's voice carried through the window. "You're harboring a woman who has rejected the natural order. She's a corrupting influence, Mr. Kane. On your men, on that poor child who follows her around, on the entire community." Kane's reply was quieter, harder to hear. Something about minding her own business. "It is our business when immorality spreads like disease. That woman refused a good man's honest proposal for no reason other than stubbornness and pride. She's dangerous. She's a cook, and she's doing her job. She's doing more than cooking, from what we hear." "Then you're hearing lies." "Are we?" "Because there are reports." "Reports from who? People who've never set foot on this property? People who decided she was guilty the second she made a choice they didn't like?" The conversation continued, but Alara had heard enough. She went back to the shed, feeling sick. That evening, Kane called her into his office after dinner. She went, stomach tight, preparing for the worst. He gestured to a chair. She sat. "You heard about the visitors," he said. Not a question. "Some of it. They want me to fire you, offered to compensate me for the inconvenience." Alara's throat went dry. "How much?" "Doesn't matter. I told them to leave." "They're going to keep pushing." Let them push. He leaned back in his chair. I hired you because you could do the job. You've done it. Better than I expected. What you did or didn't do before you got here isn't my concern. It's costing you. Everything costs something. I'm not firing you because some busybodies from town don't like your choices. She wanted to thank him but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just nodded. There's something else, Kane said. Those rumors they're spreading about you and the men. I need you to know I don't tolerate that kind of behavior on my property. Any of my hands step out of line, you tell me immediately. They haven't. Good. But if they do, I'll tell you. He studied her for a moment. You're tougher than you look. I've had practice. Yeah, I'm getting that. She stood to leave, then paused. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why'd you hire me? Really? You said yourself I came with problems. You could have turned me away like everyone else. Kane was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. My mother left my father when I was 12, packed a bag in the middle of the night and walked away. Never said where she was going or why, just left. He stared at something past Alara, somewhere in memory. Town treated her like a criminal, said she abandoned her family, her duty, her place, said she was selfish and cruel. They hunted for her, tried to drag her back. She disappeared completely, probably changed her name, started over somewhere nobody knew her. Did you ever find out why she left? My father was a drunk and mean when he drank. Used his fists more than his words. She took it for years because that's what women were supposed to do. Then one night she decided she'd had enough. He looked at Alara. I don't know if your situation's anything like that. Don't need to know. But when you showed up here talking about making your own choices and not needing to be saved, I figured you deserved a chance to prove it. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep doing your job. She left the office feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not quite hope, but a kind of determined solidarity. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Over the next few weeks, Alara threw herself into making Iron Ridge run smoother. She reorganized the supply shed, making everything easier to find. She started planning meals a week in advance to reduce waste. She figured out that the cookhouse stove worked better if you burned pine instead of oak, and that the coffee tasted less like mud if you used slightly less grounds but fresher water. Small improvements, but they added up. The ranch hands noticed. Dutch started bringing her wildflowers he found while riding fence. Nothing romantic, just something to brighten up the kitchen. Ben carved her a new spoon to replace the one that had cracked. Cole asked if she'd teach him to read better. Why me? She asked. Because you don't make me feel stupid when I get something wrong. So twice a week after dinner, she sat with Cole at the long table and helped him work through a battered copy of Roughing It that someone had left in the bunkhouse. He was slow but determined, sounding out words carefully. I ain't never going to be good at this, he said one night after struggling through a particularly dense paragraph. You're better than you were 2 weeks ago. That ain't saying much. It's saying exactly enough. Keep going. Lena watched these sessions with interest. One evening, after Cole had gone back to the bunkhouse, she asked, You think you could teach me to read better too? You already know how to read. Not good, just enough to get by. I want to be good at it. Why? Because, Lena hesitated. Because if I can read good and write good and do numbers, maybe I can get out of here someday. Do something that ain't just following cattle around. Alara saw herself at that age, hungry for something more, desperate to prove she was worth more than what people expected. All right, we'll work on it together. And so Lena joined the informal school sessions. She was a faster learner than Cole, soaking up information like dry ground soaking up rain. Alara found old newspapers and had her read articles aloud, correcting pronunciation and explaining words she didn't know. What's democracy mean? Lena asked one night. It's a system where people get to vote on their leaders and laws. So people get to choose? In theory, but not really, Alara smiled tiredly. Not always. Sometimes people say you have choices but punish you for making the wrong ones. Lena thought about that. That's stupid. Yeah, it is. Winter started creeping in. The days got shorter, the nights colder. The work got harder. Frozen water troughs, icy paths, winds that cut through clothes like they weren't there. Alara adapted. She started making heartier meals, stews that could simmer all day, thick soups, bread that was more filling than fancy. She learned to manage the stove in cold weather, keeping the fire hot without burning everything. The men came in from the cold, grateful for hot food and a warm room. The cookhouse became the heart of the ranch in a way it hadn't been before. Men lingered after meals, warming their hands around coffee cups, talking quietly about the day's work or upcoming tasks. Garrett started holding informal meetings there, using the long table to spread out maps and schedules. Kane sometimes joined them, sitting at the head of the table like a judge presiding over court. Alara moved around them, cleaning up, preparing the next meal, listening without appearing to listen. She learned things. Which hands were reliable and which needed watching. Which parts of the ranch needed repairs. Where the best grazing was. What supplies were running low. One night Kane asked her, "You keeping track of the inventory?" "Just in my head." "Write it down. Make me a list of what we need for the next 3 months." She did. Spent 2 hours after dinner going through the supply shed, checking what they had against what they'd used, calculating what they'd need to get through winter. The list she gave Kane the next morning was detailed and organized by priority. He read it, nodded. "This is good work." "Thank you. You ever think about doing something other than cooking?" "Like what?" "Ranch management. You've got a head for logistics." She laughed, short and surprised. "I'm a woman. Nobody's going to let me manage a ranch." "I might." "You're not serious." "Not yet. But if you keep proving yourself like this, I might be." He walked away before she could respond. But the problems from town kept coming. A supply wagon that was supposed to arrive got delayed. Code for someone paying the driver to skip Iron Ridge. A fence got cut on the property line nearest to Caldwell's land. Nothing that could be proven, but the pattern was clear. Then someone poisoned 2 of Kane's best horses. Garrett found them in the morning, both dead in their stalls. No sign of injury, just sudden death. The ranch hands were furious, talking about riding into town and demanding answers. Kane shut that down fast. "No one's riding anywhere. We report it, we document it, and we move on." "This was Caldwell," Garrett said. "Has to be." "Probably. But we can't prove it, and starting a range war isn't going to help anything. So we just take it? For now." Alara overheard this conversation from the cookhouse. Her hands shook as she kneaded bread dough, anger and guilt twisting in her stomach. This was her fault. Not directly. She hadn't poisoned the horses. But she was the reason Kane was a target. That evening, she found him alone in the barn, checking on the remaining horses. "I should leave." He didn't look at her. "Why?" "Because every week I stay here, something else happens. They're escalating. Next time it might not be horses." "Might not?" "I can't ask you to keep taking this." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." He finally turned to face her. "You think you're the first problem I've dealt with? Last year I had a water dispute that almost turned into a shooting war. Year before that, rustlers hit me 3 times in 2 months. This is a hard business in hard country. Problems come with the territory." "This is different." Why? Because it's about you? Because it's personal?" He shook his head. "Every problem's personal to someone. The day I start making decisions based on what Marcus Caldwell wants is the day I should sell this place and move to town." "You're being stubborn." "So are you. Difference is you're being stubborn about leaving and I'm being stubborn about you staying. I outrank you. I win." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "That's not how it works." "It is on my ranch." But that night, lying in her corner of the cookhouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were building towards something worse. The harassment had a momentum now. Each incident was a little bolder, a little more destructive. She thought about Lena, about the men who'd started to trust her, about Kane, who'd given her a chance when no one else would. She couldn't leave, not because she was stubborn, though she was, but because leaving would mean Caldwell won. Would mean that money and influence and social pressure could crush anyone who stepped out of line. And she couldn't let that be the lesson. 2 weeks later, a town meeting was called to discuss the situation at Iron Ridge Ranch. It wasn't official business. The town council wasn't involved. But Marcus Caldwell had called it and people showed up. Word reached Iron Ridge the next day. Garrett came back from a supply run with the news. "They're planning something," he told Kane. "Don't know what yet, but Caldwell was talking about community standards and protecting the territory's moral character." Let me guess. Ilara's name came up. More than once. Kane looked at Ilara, who was rolling out pie dough and pretending not to listen. What do you want to do? About what? About them. About this whole situation. She set down the rolling pin. I want to do my job and be left alone, but since that's not an option, I want to face them head on. You tried that already. Not hard enough. Garrett frowned. What are you thinking? I'm thinking they want to make me a symbol of everything wrong with modern women. Something to point at and say, see? This is what happens when you let them make their own choices. Fine, let them. But they're going to have to do it to my face. That's dangerous, Kane said. Staying here is dangerous. Leaving is dangerous. Everything's dangerous. At least if I confront them, I control the terms. What terms? She thought about it. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. The men exchanged looks. Garrett shook his head slowly. You're either brave or crazy. Can it be both? I suppose it can. That night, after the kitchen was clean and the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Ilara sat at the long table and tried to think strategically. What did she have? Not money, not social standing, not physical power. But she had skills. She could cook, sew, manage, organize. She could do math and read and write better than half the town. She'd kept this ranch running smoothly for 2 months under constant pressure, and she had something else. She had people starting to respect her. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. The ranch hands. Garrett, Kane, even Lena, though she was just a kid. Respect was currency too. Different than money, harder to quantify, but real. The question was how to leverage it. She was still thinking when Lena appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a thin coat that didn't look warm enough for the weather. You all right? Ilara asked. Can I sleep here tonight? Pa's been drinking and he gets mean when he drinks. Ilara felt her chest tighten. Of course. You can take my bed. I'll sleep on... I ain't taking your bed. Floor's fine. Lena? Floor's fine, the girl repeated firmly. I've slept worse places. Ilara got her a blanket and a spare pillow. Lena curled up in the corner near the stove where it was warmest and was asleep in minutes. Watching her sleep, Ilara made a decision. She was done playing defense, done reacting to whatever Coldridge threw at her next, done waiting for things to get worse. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. But on her terms. She just had to figure out what those terms were. The plan came to Ilara 3 days later while she was butchering a chicken. Not the most inspiring moment, but that's how good ideas worked sometimes. They showed up while your hands were bloody and your mind was elsewhere. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to find Kane. He was in the barn with Garrett, discussing which cattle to move before the serious cold set in. I need to talk to you both, she said. They looked up. Something in her tone made them pay attention. What's on your mind? Kane asked. I want to challenge them, publicly, on neutral ground. Garrett frowned. Challenge them to what? A duel? A cooking competition. Both men stared at her. You're serious, Kane said. Completely. Look, they've been saying I'm immoral, dangerous, corrupting, but what they really hate is that I chose work over marriage. So let's make it about work. Let them put their best cook against me. Public contest, judged fairly, winner takes bragging rights. And what does that solve, guys? Garrett asked. It forces them to engage with me as a person with skills, not just a symbol of everything they hate. Right now I'm abstract, the woman who said no. But if I'm standing there cooking next to someone else, proving I can do something well, that's harder to dismiss. Kane leaned against a post, thinking. Caldwell won't go for it. He might, because if their cook wins, it proves I'm nothing special. Just another woman who should have accepted her place. And if I win, she paused. If I win, I've earned respect in a way they can't argue with. And if they cheat? They probably will, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. Garrett shook his head slowly. You're gambling your reputation on a cooking contest. I don't have a reputation left to gamble. This is about creating one. Kane studied her for a long moment. You've thought this through. As much as I can. All right, I'll go into town tomorrow. Talk to Caldwell, see if he bites. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. This was your idea, but if I'm backing you, I'm doing it properly. The next day dragged. Ilara cooked and cleaned and tried not to think about what Kane was doing in Coldridge. tried not to imagine Marcus Caldwell laughing in his face. Lena noticed her distraction. "You're worried." "A little. About what Mr. Kane's doing?" "Yeah. He'll be fine. Mr. Kane doesn't back down from nobody. That's what worries me. If Caldwell says the wrong thing, Kane might say something back, and then it'll be a fight either way," Lena finished. "At least this way it's a fight you got some control over." Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Kane returned just before dinner, looking tired but not angry. That was a good sign. He waited until after the men had eaten and left before telling her what happened. He went for it. Ilara's heart jumped. "Really?" "Took some convincing. He wanted to know what you were getting out of it. I told him, if you win, the town leaves you alone. Stops the harassment, stops pressuring my suppliers, stops treating you like a plague. And if I lose? You leave the territory. For good." The words hit her like a fist. "That wasn't part of the deal I suggested." "It's the deal he'd accept. He wants you gone, Ilara. This is his way of getting what he wants while looking reasonable." She sat down heavily. "And you agreed to this?" "I told him I'd bring it to you. The choice is yours." "No pressure, though." Kane pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I need you to understand something. If you do this and lose, I'm not holding you to it. You can stay here as long as you want." "That's not how it works. If I make a deal and break it, I'm worse than before." "Then don't lose." She laughed, short and sharp. "Great advice. You're a good cook, Ilara. Better than good. You've been feeding a dozen men for 2 months and nobody's complained. You can do this." "Against who?" "Mrs. Brennan." "The banker's wife?" "She apparently does all the cooking for church socials and fundraisers. Caldwell says she's the best cook in Coldridge." Ilara thought about it the few times she'd seen Mrs. Brennan's food at community events. It was fine, competent. Nothing special, but nothing wrong either. "When's the contest?" 2 weeks from Saturday. Town Square. Open to anyone who wants to watch. 3 judges. They're still working out who. I insisted one of them be neutral, someone from outside Coldridge. "Will they actually get someone neutral?" "I'll make sure of it." Ilara stared at her hands. 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare for a competition that would decide whether she got to keep fighting or had to disappear entirely. "I'll do it," she said. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Word spread fast. By the end of the week, everyone within 50 miles knew about the contest. It was the most interesting thing to happen in the territory in months, maybe years. People were taking sides, making bets, arguing in saloons and general stores about whether Ilara Voss was brave or foolish. The ranch hands had opinions too. "You can win this easy," Cole said at breakfast one morning. "Your biscuits are better than anything I've had in town." "It's not about biscuits," Dutch pointed out. "It's about what the judges want, and they're going to want Ilara to lose." "Not all of them," Kane said. "I'm working on getting someone fair." Ben pushed his plate away. "What are you going to make?" "I don't know yet," Ilara admitted. "That's the problem. I don't know what the format is, what ingredients I'll have access to, what they're expecting." "Make what you're good at," Garrett suggested. "Don't try to be fancy. Stick with what works." Good advice, but easier said than done when you didn't know the rules. 3 days before the contest, a messenger arrived with the details. The format was simple. Each cook would prepare a complete meal: appetizer, main course, side dishes, and dessert. They'd have access to a shared pantry of ingredients, but could bring one special item of their choosing. Time limit, 4 hours. 3 judges would score each dish on taste, presentation, and creativity. The judges were listed at the bottom. Judge 1, Pastor Whitmore. Judge 2, Thomas Greer. Judge 3, a woman named Sarah Mackenzie from a town 30 miles west. Ilara didn't know Sarah Mackenzie, but at least it wasn't someone from Coldridge. Small mercy. She spent the next 2 days planning, wrote out menus, crossed them out, wrote new ones. She needed food that would travel well, that could be cooked under pressure, that would showcase skill without being so complicated she'd run out of time. Lena helped, offering opinions with the blunt honesty only children could manage. "That sounds boring." "It's classic. Boring and classic ain't the same thing." Fair point. They settled on a menu: roasted quail with herb butter for the appetizer, beef tenderloin with red wine reduction for the main, roasted root vegetables and fresh bread for sides, and apple tart with cream for dessert. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but safe food wouldn't win this. She needed to take risks. The night before the contest, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay in her corner going over every step of every recipe, checking for mistakes, second-guessing her choices. Around midnight, she gave up and went outside. The air was cold enough to sting, the sky clear and full of stars. She heard footsteps and turned. Kane approached, carrying 2 tin cups. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, handing her one. "Coffee, still hot." "Too much thinking." "Yeah, I get that." He stood next to her, both of them looking out at the dark landscape. "You ready for tomorrow?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "You don't have to do this. We could call it off." "And look like a coward? No thanks." "Looking like a coward's better than being run out of the territory." She sipped the coffee. It was terrible. Kane had made it himself and used way too much grounds, but she didn't say anything. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why do you care? Really? I get that you gave me a job, but this has gone way past that. You're risking your reputation, your business relationships, maybe more. Why?" Kane was quiet for a while. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "When my mother left, I was angry at her. For years. Thought she was selfish, thought she'd abandoned me. My father made sure I thought that, but when I got older, I started understanding what it must have taken to walk away, to choose herself over what everyone expected. That's not selfish. That's survival." He looked at her. "I couldn't help her. Didn't even know she needed help until it was too late. But when you showed up here, needing a chance and getting turned away by everyone else, I thought, maybe this time I can do something. Maybe I can give someone the opportunity to prove everyone wrong. That's a lot of weight to put on a cooking contest. Maybe, but it's not just about the contest. It's about whether people like Caldwell get to decide who matters and who doesn't." Alara felt something tight in her chest loosen just a little. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You still have to win." "I know. But for what it's worth, I think you will." They finished their coffee in silence, then went back inside to try and sleep. The morning came too fast. Alara woke before dawn, stomach in knots, and went through her routine mechanically. Made breakfast for the crew, cleaned up, packed her supplies. Kane had arranged a wagon to take her into Coldridge. Garrett would drive, and Kane would ride alongside. A few of the hands wanted to come too, for moral support, but Kane limited it to just Cole and Dutch. "Don't want to make it look like we're bringing an army," he explained. They left at 8. The ride took just over an hour. Alara sat in the back of the wagon with her supplies, trying to stay calm, trying not to think about everything that could go wrong. When they crested the final hill and Coldridge came into view, her heart sank. The town square was packed. Had to be 200 people there, maybe more. They'd set up 2 cooking stations with stoves, tables, and prep areas. A judging table sat on a raised platform. Bunting decorated the buildings like this was a celebration. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop at the edge of the square. "You all right?" "Ask me in 5 hours." She climbed down, carrying her bag of supplies. Cole and Dutch flanked her like bodyguards. The crowd noticed her immediately. Whispers rippled through like wind through wheat. Marcus Caldwell stood near the judging platform, dressed in a fine suit, looking every bit the man in charge. When he saw Alara, he smiled. Not warm, just satisfied. Mrs. Brennan was already at one of the cooking stations, wearing a pristine white apron and looking calm. She had helpers with her, 2 women from town who were organizing her supplies, offering encouragement. Alara walked to the other station alone. A man she didn't recognize stepped forward. He wore a badge that said Contest Marshal and carried a clipboard. "Alara Voss? Yes? I'm Henry Oakes. I'll be managing the contest. You understand the rules? 4 hours. Appetizer, main, sides, dessert. Shared pantry, 1 special ingredient." "Correct. The pantry's in that tent." He pointed. "You can review what's available, but you can't remove anything until the contest officially starts. Clock begins at 10 sharp. "Who's timing?" "I am. Judges will score each dish out of 10 points for taste, presentation, and creativity. 30 points possible per dish, 120 total. And the judge's decision is final?" "Yes." Elara looked at the platform where the three judges sat. Pastor Whitmore looked uncomfortable. Thomas Greer looked annoyed that he had to be there. Sarah Mackenzie, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, looked curious. "One more thing," Oakes said, lowering his voice. "I was hired specifically to make sure this contest is fair. I don't care about the politics. I care about the cooking. Anyone tries to interfere or cheat, I'll shut it down immediately. Understand?" "Yes, thank you." He nodded and walked away. Elara went to check the pantry. It was well stocked. Flour, sugar, butter, eggs, milk, various meats, vegetables, herbs, spices. Better than she'd expected. She returned to her station and started organizing. Laid out her knives, her pans, her special ingredient, a jar of wild honey she'd collected from a hive near Iron Ridge. She'd use it in the apple tart. At exactly 10 o'clock, Henry Oakes rang a bell. "Cooks, you may begin." The crowd cheered. Elara took a breath and got to work. The first hour was a blur. She prepped the quail, made the herb butter, started the bread dough. Across from her, Mrs. Brennan worked with mechanical efficiency, her helpers fetching things and offering suggestions. Elara had no helpers, just herself. She tried to block out the crowd, the noise, the pressure. Focused on each task. Knife work, timing, temperature control. The quail went into the oven. The bread dough rose. She started on the beef, trimming it carefully, seasoning it properly. At the 2-hour mark, she glanced over at Mrs. Brennan's station. The woman had some kind of roasted chicken going, potatoes, a salad, and what looked like a berry cobbler. Solid choices. Safe. Exactly what Elara had expected. She kept working. Made the wine reduction for the beef, used some of Kane's good red wine that he'd given her as her special ingredient. Wait, no, the honey was her special ingredient. The wine was from the pantry. She forced herself to focus. Her hands were shaking slightly. She willed them to stop. At 3 hours, the appetizers were due. Henry Oakes came around to collect the dishes. Elara plated her quail, 4 birds arranged on a serving platter, drizzled with herb butter, garnished with fresh thyme. It looked good, simple but elegant. Mrs. Brennan's appetizer was deviled eggs with paprika. Classic, crowd-pleasing. The judges tasted both dishes without comment, made notes on their scoring sheets. Elara couldn't tell anything from their faces. Back to work. The beef needed another 20 minutes. The vegetables were roasting. The bread was almost done. She started on the apple tart, sliced the apples thin, arranged them in overlapping circles, drizzled wild honey over the top. At 3.5 hours, disaster struck. Someone bumped into her table. Hard. Her wine reduction, which had been simmering perfectly, sloshed over the side of the pan and onto the stove. The liquid hit the hot surface and evaporated instantly, filling the air with acrid smoke. Elara spun around. A young man she didn't recognize stood there, looking startled. "Sorry, I tripped." But his eyes said something else. This wasn't an accident. The crowd murmured. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others smirked. Henry Oakes appeared immediately. "What happened?" "He knocked into my table," Elara said, keeping her voice level. "Spilled my sauce." Oakes looked at the young man. "That true?" "I tripped. It was an accident." "Right." Oakes turned to Elara. "Do you need additional time to remake it?" "No." She couldn't afford the time penalty. "I'll work with what I have." What she had was about 1/3 of the sauce she'd planned, not enough to properly coat the beef. She'd have to adjust. She strained what was left, reduced it further to concentrate the flavor, and decided to use it as an accent rather than a coating. Drizzle it artistically around the plate instead of over the meat. Not ideal, but workable. At 4 hours exactly, the bell rang. "Time! Step away from your stations!" Elara stepped back, heart pounding. Her hands were raw, her back ached, and she felt like she'd run 10 miles uphill, but the food was done. The judges came to evaluate the main courses first. Mrs. Brennan's roasted chicken looked perfect. Golden skin, herb garnish, arranged beautifully with roasted potatoes around it. Elara's beef tenderloin was sliced into perfect medallions, arranged in a fan, with the wine reduction drizzled around the edge. The roasted vegetables, carrots, parsnips, beets, added color. The bread was still warm from the oven. The judges tasted in silence, made notes. Then the desserts. Mrs. Brennan's berry cobbler was textbook perfect. Golden crust, bubbling fruit, served with a dollop of cream. Alara's apple tart was more delicate, thin slices arranged in a precise pattern, caramelized at the edges, the honey glaze catching the light, more tasting, more notes. Then the judges conferred quietly among themselves for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Pastor Whitmore stood. The crowd went silent. "We have made our decision. However, this is not a simple matter. Mrs. Brennan's food was excellent. Classic preparations, executed flawlessly. Exactly what we expect from a skilled home cook." He paused. Alara's stomach twisted. Miss Voss's food was different, more ambitious. The flavors were complex, the techniques advanced. However, he looked directly at Alara. There was an incident during preparation that may have affected the final result. "The incident was caused by interference," Henry Oakes interjected. "Should not be held against the cook." Whitmore frowned. "Nevertheless, the sauce was sparse." "Because it was sabotaged," Kane said from the crowd. His voice carried. "Everyone saw it." Murmurs of agreement. Even some of the townspeople looked uncomfortable. Thomas Greer stood. "The rules were followed. The food was evaluated as presented. Our scores reflect that." Sarah Mackenzie, the third judge, stood as well. "I'd like to say something, if I may." Everyone looked at her. "I was brought here to provide an outside perspective. I don't know Miss Voss. Don't know Mrs. Brennan. Don't care about the politics." She looked around the crowd. "What I care about is the food. And I can tell you without hesitation that Miss Voss's cooking demonstrated skill, creativity, and technique that goes far beyond home cooking. That apple tart alone showed pastry work I haven't seen outside a professional kitchen." "But the sauce?" Whitmore began. "The sauce was fine. Yes, there was less of it than probably intended, but what was there was perfectly balanced. The beef was cooked to precise medium rare. The bread was professional quality. This wasn't just good food. It was exceptional food, made under pressure, with active sabotage happening." She pulled out her scoring sheet. "My scores reflect that. Miss Voss, 92 points. Mrs. Brennan, 78 points." The crowd erupted. People shouting, arguing, some applauding. Whitmore looked angry. "That seems excessive." "It's accurate. Would you like to challenge my professional assessment?" "You're not a professional chef." "Actually, I ran a restaurant in Denver for 12 years before moving out here, so yes, I am." That shut him up. Greer cleared his throat. "Regardless of Mrs. Mackenzie's scores, Pastor Whitmore and I both scored Mrs. Brennan higher. The combined total—" "Show them the scores," Sarah Mackenzie said. "All of them. Let everyone see." Oakes collected the scoring sheets and held them up one by one. Pastor Whitmore. Brennan, 85. Voss, 62. Thomas Greer. Brennan, 88. Voss, 59. Sarah Mackenzie. Brennan, 78. Voss, 92. The math was obvious even before Oakes announced it. Total scores: Mrs. Brennan, 251. Miss Voss, 213. Mrs. Brennan had won. The crowd's reaction split down the middle. Half cheered, half looked uncomfortable or angry. Alara stood there numb. She'd lost, which meant she had to leave. But before anyone could say anything else, Sarah Mackenzie spoke again. "I want it on record that this was not a fair contest. Two judges who had a clear bias scored their preferred candidate impossibly high and their opponent impossibly low. Miss Voss's appetizer was scored a 4 by Pastor Whitmore. 4 out of 10 for perfectly cooked quail. That's not judging, that's cheating." "How dare you?" Whitmore started. "I dare because it's true. You wanted her to lose, so you made sure she lost. That's not a competition. That's a sham." The crowd was getting louder, arguments breaking out in every direction. Marcus Caldwell stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. Eventually, the noise died down. The contest was held according to the agreed-upon rules. The judges rendered their decision. "Miss Voss, I believe you had an agreement—" "I did," Alara said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "And I'll honor it. I'll leave." "No," Kane pushed through the crowd. "She won't." "That was the deal," Caldwell said. "The deal was contingent on a fair contest. This wasn't fair. It was rigged from the start." "That's a serious accusation." "It's a true one. Everyone here saw it. The sabotage, the biased judging, the whole thing." People in the crowd were nodding now. Even some of Caldwell's allies looked uncomfortable. Sarah Mackenzie stepped down from the platform. She walked directly to Alara. I don't know you, and I don't know your story, but I know food, and I know when I've seen something special. You can cook, really cook. Don't let these people take that from you. She walked away before Alara could respond. The crowd was still arguing. Caldwell and Kane were facing off, voices raised. The whole thing was descending into chaos. And then, cutting through the noise, a single voice. I got something to say! Everyone turned. Lena stood on the edge of the crowd, small and defiant. You all been treating Miss Alara like she done something terrible, like she's some kind of criminal, but all she did was say no to getting married. That's it. That's the whole crime. The girl's voice shook but didn't break. And you're so scared of that, so scared that other women might say no too, that you're willing to cheat and lie and hurt people to prove she's wrong. But she ain't wrong. She's just free, and that scares you more than anything. Silence. Complete silence. Lena wasn't done. I'm just a kid. Nobody cares what I think. But I've watched Miss Alara work harder than anyone I ever seen. She earned respect. She proved herself. And you still won't give it to her because she won't do what you want. That makes you the bad ones, not her. The girl turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping. Just one person. Then another. Then more. Not everyone. Maybe not even most people. But enough. Marcus Caldwell stood there looking like he'd been slapped. Alara felt something break loose inside her chest. Not relief, not quite victory, but something close. Something that felt like maybe, finally, things were starting to shift. Kane approached her. We're leaving, now. What about, forget the agreement. He can come after us if he wants. Let him try. They walked back to the wagon, the crew forming a protective circle around her. Behind them, the arguments continued, but Alara didn't look back. The ride home was quiet. Nobody talked much. Cole tried once to say something encouraging, but Alara shook her head and he fell silent. She'd lost the contest, but somehow it didn't feel like losing. When they reached Iron Ridge, Alara went straight to the cookhouse. Started preparing dinner even though her hands were shaking and her eyes kept blurring. Lena showed up 20 minutes later. You didn't have to do that, Alara said. Yeah, I did. You're going to catch hell from people. I was catching hell anyway. Might as well earn it. Alara pulled the girl into a hug. Lena stiffened at first, then relaxed, hugging back fierce and tight. Thank you, Alara whispered. You would have done the same for me. Yeah, I would. That night at dinner, the mood was subdued. The men ate quietly, offering Alara sympathetic looks, but no empty platitudes. Afterward, Kane stayed behind. What happens now? Alara asked. I don't know. Caldwell might push the issue, might not. Either way, you're not going anywhere. That could cause you real problems. I've had worse. She almost smiled. You keep saying that. Because it's true. A week passed. Then another. Alara kept expecting trouble. Enforcers from town. Legal threats. Something. But nothing came. Slowly, word filtered back. The contest had fractured Coldridge. Some people thought it was justified. Others thought it was shameful. Arguments in the saloon turned into fistfights. The town council held emergency meetings, and gradually, quietly, some people started questioning whether Marcus Caldwell should have as much influence as he did. It wasn't a revolution, just cracks in the foundation. But cracks were a start. Then, 3 weeks after the contest, on a brutally cold morning when frost covered everything and the sky looked like iron, a rider came to Iron Ridge in a panic. Kane, we got men missing. Blizzard came up fast during night watch. Peterson and Webb didn't make it back to the line shack. Been gone since midnight. Kane was moving before the man finished talking. How bad's the weather? Bad and getting worse. Can't see 20 feet. Temperature's dropping fast. Alara stepped out of the cookhouse. What do you need? Kane looked at her. Hot food, coffee, medical supplies if you have them. We're organizing a search party. I'll get it ready. Within an hour, 6 men rode out into the blizzard. Kane, Garrett, Dutch, Ben, and 2 others. The wind was howling, snow coming down so thick it looked like the world was ending. Alara worked fast, made a massive pot of stew, brewed coffee by the gallon, gathered every blanket she could find, boiled water, prepared bandages. She didn't know if they'd find the missing men, didn't know if the searchers would make it back themselves. All she could do was be ready. The hours crawled past. Cole stayed behind with her and Lena, pacing nervously. "They'll be fine," he kept saying. "They know this country. They'll be fine." But he didn't sound convinced. At 4 in the afternoon, with daylight already fading, she heard horses. Everyone rushed outside. The search party was back, all of them, plus 2 more men wrapped in blankets and barely conscious. Peterson and Webb. They'd found them. "Get them inside," Kane shouted. "Alara, we need heat and dry clothes now." She was already moving. The men carried the 2 frozen ranch hands into the cookhouse. Alara had the stove blazing hot, blankets ready, hot water waiting. Peterson was in worse shape. His lips were blue, fingers white with frostbite, body shaking so violently he couldn't speak. Webb was conscious but disoriented, mumbling incoherently. "Strip their wet clothes," Alara ordered. "Get them wrapped in dry blankets. Not too close to the stove. Warm them gradually." The men followed her instructions without question. She made them drink warm water, not hot, which could shock their systems, but warm. Checked their extremities for frostbite. Peterson's fingers were bad. 2 of them might not make it. "We need a doctor," Garrett said. "Nearest doctor's in Coldridge," Kane replied. "Can't get there in this weather. Won't let up till morning at earliest." "Then we work with what we have." Alara looked at the gathered men. "I need boiling water, clean cloth, and someone to help me. These fingers need treatment or he'll lose them." Dutch stepped forward. "Tell me what to do." For the next 3 hours, Alara worked. She'd never treated frostbite before, but she'd read about it, heard stories. You had to rewarm the tissue gradually, keep it clean, prevent infection. She did the best she could with what she had. Peterson drifted in and out of consciousness. Webb recovered faster, his hypothermia less severe. By midnight, both men were stable, wrapped in blankets and sleeping fitfully. Alara sat back against the wall, exhausted. Kane brought her coffee. "You saved their lives. You found them. That's what saved them. We found them because we knew you'd be able to help when we got back. That's what made the risk worth it." The other men were settling down, some sleeping right there in the cookhouse to keep the fire going and watch over the injured. Lena appeared with extra blankets, distributing them without being asked. It was past 2 in the morning when things finally quieted down. Alara sat at the long table, too wired to sleep, watching the men sleep. Kane sat across from her. "You did good today," he said quietly. "So did you. This is what it comes down to, not contests or politics or who said what, just whether you can handle the crisis when it comes. I barely know what I'm doing. None of us do, but you did it anyway." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the blizzard still raged. Inside, the cookhouse was warm and full of sleeping men who trusted her enough to let her treat their injuries. It wasn't the victory she'd imagined, but maybe it was better. By morning, the storm had passed. Peterson's fingers were saved, all of them, though they'd be sensitive for months. Webb was fully recovered, already joking about his brush with death. The story spread. Not through official channels, but through the kind of informal network that moves information faster than telegraph. Ranch hands talking to supply drivers, drivers talking to merchants, merchants talking to everyone. Alara Voss had helped save 2 men's lives during a blizzard, had organized a crisis response, had kept her head when others panicked. Respect, it turned out, could be earned in ways that had nothing to do with cooking contests. And this time, nobody could take it away. News of the rescue traveled faster than Alara expected. Within days, people from neighboring ranches started showing up at Iron Ridge, not to cause trouble, but to see the woman who'd treated frostbite in a blizzard with nothing but boiling water and determination. She didn't know what to do with the attention. Mostly, she just kept working, but the visitors kept coming. A rancher from 20 miles south brought his daughter, who had a persistent cough, asking if Alara knew anything about medicine. She didn't, but she made the girl tea with honey and told the father to keep her warm and dry. 2 days later, he came back with a smoked ham as thanks. The cough had cleared up. "I didn't do anything," Alara protested. "You did more than nothing. That counts." The gifts kept coming. A woman from a homestead brought fresh eggs. A family passing through left a jar of preserves. Small things, but they added up to something larger. Acknowledgement that she existed as more than a scandal. Even some people from Coldridge started softening. Not many, and not the ones who mattered most, but enough that Alara noticed. A merchant who'd refused to sell to anyone from Iron Ridge suddenly had supplies available again. The blacksmith, who'd been cold and distant, nodded to Garrett when he came to town. It wasn't forgiveness, just exhaustion. The town was tired of fighting. Marcus Caldwell, however, was not. He showed up at Iron Ridge on a gray afternoon in late November, riding alone, which surprised everyone. Kane met him at the main house, and Alara watched from the cookhouse window as the two men talked. Their voices didn't carry, but their body language did. Caldwell was stiff, formal. Kane was guarded, but listening. After 20 minutes, Caldwell rode away. Kane came to the cookhouse. "What did he want?" Alara asked. "To make another offer." "What kind of offer?" Kane sat down heavily. "He'll drop all the pressure on my suppliers, stop the town harassment, even make a public statement that you're free to work where you choose. In exchange, you agree to never come back to Coldridge. Stay out here, stay quiet, and he'll leave you alone." "That's almost reasonable." "It's a cage with better bars. He still gets to control where you go and what you do." Alara stirred the stew she was making, thinking, "What did you tell him?" "That it wasn't my decision to make." "And what do you think I should do?" "I think you should tell him to go to hell, but like I said, not my decision." She ladled stew into bowls for the evening meal, her mind working through the angles. Accepting meant peace, stability, an end to the constant pressure. It meant she could stay at Iron Ridge without costing Kane his business relationships. But it also meant Caldwell won. Meant he got to decide the terms of her existence. "I'm not taking it," she said. Kane almost smiled. "Figured as much. But I'm not just refusing either. I'm going to make a counteroffer." "What kind of counteroffer?" "I want to compete again. Same format, same judges, but this time with rules that prevent sabotage. I want it done properly." "Alara, you don't have to prove anything else." "Yes, I do. That first contest was tainted. Everyone knows it. Even the people who wanted me to lose know it. If I walk away now, there's always going to be the question, could she have won if it was fair? And if you lose again? Then I lose, but at least it'll be real." Kane studied her for a long moment. "You're really doing this. I'm really doing this." "All right, I'll tell Caldwell, but he's not going to like it." "Good." Caldwell's response came 3 days later via a terse letter. He accepted the challenge, but added conditions. The contest would be held in 1 month, giving both cooks time to prepare. The judges would include Sarah Mackenzie again, but the other two would be chosen by committee. 3 people from Coldridge, 3 from Iron Ridge, negotiating together. The special ingredient rule was eliminated. Both cooks would work with identical ingredients from the same pantry. No helpers, no interference, strict time limits. And this time, if Alara lost, she had to leave the territory permanently. No loopholes, no exceptions. "He's making the stakes as high as possible," Garrett said when he heard. "Trying to scare you off." "It's working a little," Alara admitted, "but I'm still doing it." The month of preparation was brutal. Alara cooked constantly, testing recipes, perfecting techniques, trying to anticipate what the judges might value. She made the same dishes over and over until she could do them blindfolded. The ranch hands became her unofficial testing panel, offering opinions that ranged from helpful to bizarre. "This one tastes like happiness," Cole said about a particular soup. "That's not helpful," Alara replied. "Sure it is. Make more of that one." Lena helped where she could, but mostly she just watched, absorbing everything. The girl had gotten quieter lately, more serious. She'd had another run-in with town kids. This time they'd cornered her near the creek and called her names. She'd fought back and come home with a split lip and scraped knuckles. Alara had cleaned her up without lecturing, understanding that sometimes words didn't fix anything. "You think you're going to win?" Lena asked one night while they were cleaning up. "I think I'm going to try." "That ain't the same thing." "No, it's not." "What happens if you lose? You really leaving?" Alara set down the dish she was washing. "Yeah, I made the deal. I'll honor it." "That's stupid." "Maybe, but it's the right kind of stupid." Lena didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. 2 weeks before the contest, Sarah Mackenzie visited Iron Ridge. She rode out alone, introduced herself to Kane, and asked to speak with Alara. They sat in the cookhouse with coffee while Ilara worked on bread dough. I wanted to see how you were preparing, Sarah said. Is that allowed? I'm not judging yet. Right now I'm just curious. She sipped her coffee. You know you're better than Mrs. Brennan, right? I know I was better last time. Doesn't mean I will be this time. Fair point, but you have something she doesn't. You cook like someone who had to earn every skill. There's a difference between someone who learned because it was expected and someone who learned because they needed to. You can taste that? Every time. It's in the details. The way you handle ingredients, the respect you show the process. Mrs. Brennan cooks well, but she cooks comfortably. You cook hungry. Ilara kneaded the dough harder than necessary. Hungry is not always good. In cooking it is. It means you care about the outcome. You're not just going through motions, you're trying to prove something. And what am I trying to prove? That you exist on your own terms, that your choices matter, that you're worth the space you take up. Sarah set down her cup. That's a powerful thing to put on a plate. You're making this sound more philosophical than it is. Maybe. Or maybe that's exactly what it is. Sarah stood. I shouldn't stay long. Don't want anyone accusing me of bias. But I wanted you to know, I'm judging the food, not the politics. Best dish wins. Period. That's all I'm asking for. Then you'll get it. After Sarah left, Ilara felt something shift. Not confidence exactly, but clarity. This wasn't about Marcus Caldwell or Mrs. Brennan or even Coldridge. This was about whether Ilara Voss could stand up under pressure and deliver something excellent. Everything else was noise. The judge selection process turned into its own battle. The committee met 4 times, arguing over candidates. Coldridge wanted people sympathetic to traditional values. Iron Ridge wanted people who actually knew food. They finally settled on 2 compromises. A cattle broker from a neutral territory who claimed to have no opinions about anything except beef prices, and a school teacher from a town 50 miles east who'd agreed to judge based solely on the food. Both seemed fair enough, though Ilara trusted nothing at this point. 1 week before the contest, Mrs. Brennan sent a message. She wanted to speak with Ilara privately. It's a trap, Dutch said when he heard. Probably, Ilara agreed, but I'm curious. They met at a halfway point between Coldridge and Iron Ridge, an abandoned line shack that neither side claimed. Mrs. Brennan arrived with one companion, an older woman Ilara didn't recognize. Ilara came with Garrett, who waited outside. Inside the shack, the 2 women faced each other across a dusty table. Mrs. Brennan looked tired, not physically, but in the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy too long. Thank you for coming, she said. What do you want? To talk, off the record, just the 2 of us. She glanced at her companion, who nodded and stepped outside, leaving them alone. Mrs. Brennan took a breath. I didn't want any of this. The contest, the conflict, the whole mess. Marcus asked me to compete, and I said yes because... She paused. Because I was angry. At you, for making me question things I'd always accepted. I didn't make you question anything. You did just by existing the way you do. I married young, had children, did what was expected, and I was fine with that, or I thought I was, until you stood in that square and said no to a good man for no reason except you wanted to. It wasn't for no reason. I know that now. But at the time it felt like you were saying everything I'd chosen was wrong, like I was stupid for taking the safe path. Ilara sat down slowly. I never thought that. I know, but that's how it felt. Mrs. Brennan twisted her hands together. I'm not asking you to withdraw. I know you won't. But I wanted you to know I'm not going to cheat this time. I'm going to cook the best I can, and whatever happens, happens. Why are you telling me this? Because after the last contest, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about those scores, about how obvious it was that the judges were lying. I won, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like being handed something I didn't earn. She met Ilara's eyes. I want to beat you fair. Not because Marcus wants me to, but because I want to know if I actually can. Ilara didn't know what to say to that. Finally, she just nodded. All right. All right. They left the shack without saying anything else. Garrett fell into step beside Ilara as they walked back to the horses. What was that about? Honesty, I think. You believe her? Doesn't matter if I do. I'm preparing like everyone's against me anyway. But she did believe her. Something in Mrs. Brennan's voice had been too raw to be a performance. The final week was a blur of preparation. Alara barely slept, working through recipes in her mind at night, testing and retesting during the day. The ranch hands started complaining that the food was too fancy. "We're cowboys, not kings," Ben grumbled after a particularly elaborate dinner. "Consider it practice," Alara shot back. Kane pulled her aside 3 days before the contest. "You need to rest. You're running yourself into the ground." "I'm fine." "You're not. You've got shadows under your eyes and your hands are shaking." "They always shake when I'm nervous." "Alara," he caught her arm gently, "you've already proven yourself 10 times over. You don't have to be perfect." "Yes, I do. Because if I'm not perfect, they'll say it's because women can't handle pressure. If I'm just good, that's not good enough. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, but I'm dealing with the world as it is, not as it should be." He let go of her arm. "At least sleep tonight, full 8 hours." "That's an order." She tried. Managed maybe 5 hours of restless half-sleep before giving up and going back to the kitchen. Lena found her there at dawn, making pastry dough for the 100th time. "You're going to win," the girl said. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do, because you're too stubborn to lose." Alara almost laughed. "That's not how cooking works." "Maybe not, but it's how you work." The day of the contest arrived clear and cold. Alara dressed carefully. Simple clothes, clean apron, hair pulled back tight. She wanted to look professional, competent, unremarkable. The ride into Coldridge felt longer than it should have. Garrett drove again with Kane beside him and half the ranch hands in the wagon bed. This time, they weren't hiding. If Alara was going to do this, she was going to do it with her people visible. The town square was packed again, even bigger crowd than last time. But the atmosphere was different, less carnival, more serious. People wanted to see how this ended. The cooking stations were set up the same way, but this time Henry Oakes had assistants monitoring everything. No one would get close enough to interfere. Mrs. Brennan was already there, looking calm and prepared. When she saw Alara, she nodded, just once. Alara nodded back. The judges took their places. Sarah Mackenzie looked alert and interested. The cattle broker looked bored. The schoolteacher looked nervous. At exactly 10 o'clock, Oakes rang the bell. "Cooks, begin!" Alara moved into the rhythm she'd practiced 1,000 times. Check the pantry, gather ingredients, organize her station. Everything she needed was there. Good quality meat, fresh vegetables, flour, butter, eggs. She'd decided on her menu during a sleepless night a week ago. Seared duck breast with cherry reduction for the appetizer, herb-crusted lamb with roasted fingerling potatoes and braised greens for the main, and a chocolate souffle with cream anglaise for dessert. Ambitious, technical, and risky. The souffle especially. It could fall, could overcook, could fail in a dozen ways. But if it worked, it would be undeniable. She started with prep work. Trimmed the lamb, scored the duck skin, chopped vegetables. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over. Across from her, Mrs. Brennan was making what looked like beef Wellington, a classic salad, and some kind of layered cake. Solid choices. Safe. Exactly what Alara had expected. The first hour passed in focused silence. Alara got the lamb in the oven, started the cherry reduction, began the potatoes. The duck needed to wait, had to be cooked last minute so the skin stayed crispy. At 2 hours, she checked on Mrs. Brennan's progress. The woman was working steadily, no panic, no mistakes. She'd done this before, knew how to manage her time. Alara forced herself to focus on her own work. Started the souffle batter, getting it to the perfect consistency. Not too thin, not too thick. The eggs had to be folded in carefully, and the timing had to be exact. At 3 hours, the appetizers were due. Alara plated her duck, perfectly seared, skin crispy, meat pink in the center, cherry reduction pooled artfully on the plate with a sprig of fresh thyme. Mrs. Brennan's appetizer was a mushroom tart with herb salad. It looked beautiful, professional. The judges tasted both without comment. Made their notes. Back to work. The lamb was almost done. Alara checked it with a meat thermometer. Perfect internal temperature. She pulled it out to rest, got the potatoes plated, wilted the greens with garlic and butter. The souffle went into the oven. This was the moment of truth. Soufflés were temperamental, too hot. and they'd burn. Too cool, and they wouldn't rise. Any interference, and they'd collapse. She set a timer and forced herself not to open the oven door. At 3.5 hours, the main courses were collected. Ilara's lamb was sliced into perfect medallions, arranged with the potatoes and greens, finished with a herb crust that had stayed intact. Mrs. Brennan's beef Wellington looked textbook perfect. Golden pastry, medium rare beef, everything exactly as it should be. The judges tasted, made notes. Ilara couldn't read their faces. 30 minutes left. The soufflé should be almost done. Ilara checked through the oven window. It had risen beautifully, golden on top, no signs of collapse. She pulled it out at exactly the right moment, dusted it with powdered sugar, and prepared the crème anglaise. Mrs. Brennan was frosting her cake, working quickly but carefully. At 4 hours exactly, the bell rang. Time! Step away from your stations. Ilara stepped back. Her soufflé was perfect, risen, golden, still holding its shape. The crème anglaise was smooth and rich. Mrs. Brennan's cake was a 3-layer masterpiece with intricate frosting designs. The judges evaluated the desserts. Ilara watched as Sarah Mackenzie cut into the soufflé, saw it steam gently, saw the perfect texture inside. Then they tasted Mrs. Brennan's cake. More notes, more silence. The judges conferred for 15 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, they stood. Sarah Mackenzie spoke first. This was a difficult decision. Both cooks demonstrated excellent technique and creativity. Mrs. Brennan's food was polished, professional, exactly what you'd expect from an experienced home cook. She paused. Miss Voss's food was something different, more ambitious, more technical, with a level of precision that goes beyond home cooking into professional territory. The cattle broker spoke next. I'm not a fancy food person. I know what I like. Both of these women can cook. But if I'm being honest, Miss Voss's lamb was the best piece of meat I've had all year, and I eat a lot of meat. The schoolteacher nodded nervously. I agree. Both were excellent, but Miss Voss's dishes showed a level of skill that was, well, it was remarkable. Sarah Mackenzie held up the scoring sheets. Our final scores, Mrs. Brennan, 268 points, Miss Voss, 284 points. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half stunned into silence. Ilara stood there, not quite believing it. She'd won. Actually, won. Mrs. Brennan walked over, extended her hand. Congratulations. You earned it. Ilara shook her hand, saw something genuine in the other woman's eyes. Thank you. Marcus Caldwell didn't say anything, just stood there looking like he'd been punched, then turned and walked away. The crowd was chaos, people arguing, celebrating, complaining. Ilara didn't care about any of it. She'd done what she set out to do, proved herself on her own terms. Kane appeared beside her. How's it feel? Strange. Good strange, but strange. You just beat the best cook in Coldridge in front of half the territory. You're allowed to feel strange. The Iron Ridge crew surrounded her, offering congratulations and backslaps. Lena pushed through the crowd and hugged her hard enough to hurt. I told you, the girl said, too stubborn to lose. That night, back at Iron Ridge, the men threw an impromptu celebration. Someone found a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden in the bunkhouse. Cole played a battered harmonica. Dutch did a terrible impression of Pastor Whitmore's face when the scores were announced. Ilara sat at the long table, exhausted and exhilarated, watching her crew celebrate. Garrett raised his glass. To Ilara, who came here with nothing and ended up showing us all how it's done. To Ilara, the men echoed. She raised her own glass, just water. She was too tired for whiskey and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not just acceptance, not just respect, belonging. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Ilara sat outside looking at the stars. Kane found her there. Can't sleep? Too much going on in my head. He sat beside her. You know what happens now, right? What? People are going to want things from you. Cooking lessons, recipes, advice. You just became the most talked about person in 3 counties. That sounds terrible. It is, but it's also opportunity. She looked at him. What kind of opportunity? The kind where you decide what comes next. You could stay here, keep cooking for the crew, or you could start something bigger. Like what? A restaurant, a teaching kitchen. Hell, you could write a cookbook. Point is, you've got options now, real ones. Alara thought about that. Options. A luxury she hadn't had 6 months ago. I need to think about it. Take your time. Just know, whatever you decide, you've got support here. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky, while inside the cookhouse the fire burned low and warm. The week after the contest, Alara woke each morning half expecting to find it had all been a dream. But the evidence was real. People kept showing up at Iron Ridge asking for her. A rancher's wife wanted cooking lessons. A merchant from 2 towns over wanted to know if she'd cater his daughter's wedding. Someone even rode out from a mining camp 50 miles north asking if she'd consider opening a dining hall there. She turned them all down, not out of fear or uncertainty, but because she didn't know yet what she wanted. Winning the contest had proven she could cook under pressure. It hadn't answered the bigger question of what came next. You can't hide forever, Garrett told her one morning while she was making breakfast. People know who you are now. That changes things whether you want it to or not. I'm not hiding, I'm thinking. Thinking looks a lot like hiding from where I'm standing. She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it and grinned. But he was right. She couldn't stay in the cookhouse forever, cooking for a dozen ranch hands and pretending the world outside Iron Ridge didn't exist. She'd fought too hard for visibility to retreat into invisibility now. The answer started forming during a conversation with Lena. The girl had been quieter than usual lately, helping in the kitchen, but not talking much. Finally, Alara asked what was wrong. Nothing's wrong. Lena, the girl set down the potato she was peeling. My pa says we're probably moving on soon. Work here's seasonal and winter's coming. He'll find something else somewhere else. And you don't want to go. I don't want to leave you. Alara felt her chest tighten. She'd gotten used to having Lena around, the girl's sharp observations and stubborn loyalty. The thought of her leaving hurt more than it should. Where would you go? Don't know. Wherever there's work. Could be anywhere. What if there was work here? Not for your father necessarily, but for you. Lena looked up. What do you mean? I've been thinking about starting something. A business, maybe. I don't know exactly what yet, but she paused, the idea taking shape as she spoke. But if I did, I'd need help. Someone smart and hardworking and not afraid to speak up when something's wrong. You mean me? I mean you. I'm just a kid. You're smart enough to be more than just a kid, and you work harder than half the adults I know. Lena stared at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was small. Nobody's ever wanted to keep me around before. Well, I do, so think about it. The girl nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That conversation crystallized something for Alara. She didn't want to open a restaurant or travel around catering events. She wanted to build something permanent, something that created opportunity for people who didn't have any. She went to Kane with the idea that evening. I want to start a boarding house with a dining room. Here, on Iron Ridge land, if you'll lease me the space. Somewhere people can stay when they're passing through, get a decent meal, maybe hire on for temporary work. And I want to train people, women especially, in cooking and housekeeping so they have skills they can use. Kane leaned back in his chair. That's ambitious. Is that a no? It's not a no. It's me trying to figure out if you've thought this through. I've thought about it. Not all the details yet, but the core idea. I'm sure about that. Where would you get the money to build it? I've got some saved, not enough, but some. I could take loans, find investors maybe, or start small and grow over time. And you'd run it yourself. With help. Lena, if her father agrees, maybe hire a few others. I'm not trying to build an empire, just something sustainable. Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a ledger. I've been keeping track of what you've saved me since you got here. Better food means healthier men means less sick time and better work. You organize the supply system so we waste less. You've treated injuries that would have cost me doctor visits. And your presence here has made this place feel less like just a work camp. He showed her the numbers. You've saved me about $300 in 6 months. I'm willing to invest that in your business if you'll let me be a partner. Silent partner. I don't want to run it, but I want to support it. Alara stared at the ledger. $300 was more than she'd expected, more than seemed fair. I can't take your money. It's not charity, it's investment. You build something successful, I get a return. You fail, I lose the investment, but I tried. That's how business works. Why would you do this? Because I believe in what you're trying to build, and because He closed the ledger. Because my mother never got a second chance. But maybe you can give one to someone else who needs it. Alara felt tears sting her eyes but refused to let them fall. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it works. The next challenge was telling Lena's father. His name was Jack Morrison, and Alara had seen him maybe 5 times total. He worked the far pastures, stayed in a line shack most of the time, and seemed content to let Lena raise herself. Alara found him one evening when he came in for supplies. He was a weathered man, 40-ish, with the kind of worn-out look that came from too many years of hard living. Mr. Morrison, I need to talk to you about Lena. He tensed immediately. She in trouble? No. Opposite, actually. I'm starting a business and I want to hire her. She'd have steady work, a place to stay, education opportunities. I'd pay her fair wages and make sure she's looked after. Jack stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You want to hire my daughter? Yes? Why? Because she's smart and hardworking and deserves a chance. She's 10 years old. I know, but she's been working since she was old enough to walk, hasn't she? This way she'd be working towards something, learning skills that could give her a real future. Jack was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, Her mother died when she was 4. I've done my best, but my best ain't much. I work where there's work, and Lana comes along because there's nowhere else for her to go. So let her stay here. Let her have stability. And what do I do? Whatever you want. Work here if Kane has a place for you. Work somewhere else if you don't. But give Lena the chance to put down roots. He looked past Alara toward the main house, thinking. She talks about you all the time. Says you're the smartest person she knows. Says you treat her like she matters. She does matter. Yeah. His voice was rough. Yeah, she does. All right, if she wants to stay, she can stay. But I'll be coming by regular to check on her. I'd expect nothing less. They shook hands. His grip was strong, calloused, the handshake of a man who'd worked for everything he had and trusted nothing. When Alara told Lena, the girl cried. Not sad tears, relief tears, joy tears, the kind that came from finally being wanted. You're really going to let me stay? You're really going to help me build this thing? Yeah, I am. They hugged, 2 people who'd found each other when they both needed finding most. The building process took 3 months. Alara hired a carpenter from a neighboring town, and together they converted an old storage building on the edge of Iron Ridge property into something livable. 4 guest rooms upstairs, a dining room and kitchen downstairs, a small office in the back. It wasn't fancy. The floors creaked, the windows stuck in their frames, and the stove was temperamental. But it was solid, clean, and entirely hers. She named it the Crossroads because it sat at the intersection of 2 main trails and because it represented a new direction for everyone who came through. Word spread before the doors even opened. A boarding house run by the woman who'd beaten Mrs. Brennan in that contest. People were curious, skeptical, interested. Some wanted to support her. Others wanted to see her fail. Alara didn't care about either group. She cared about doing the work right. The first guest was a widow traveling west to live with her sister. She stayed 3 days, paid in full, and left a note saying the food reminded her of home. The second was a prospector who'd struck out in the mountains and needed a place to rest before trying again. He stayed a week, helped fix the leaky roof in exchange for reduced rates, and left promising to spread the word. Slowly, steadily, the Crossroads built a reputation. Good food, clean rooms, fair prices, and a proprietor who didn't pry into your business but made you feel welcome anyway. Alara hired 2 women to help, both of them in situations similar to hers, needing work and getting turned away everywhere else. She taught them cooking, housekeeping, bookkeeping, paid them decent wages, and treated them like equals. Lena thrived. She worked mornings, studied afternoons. Alara had found a retired schoolteacher who agreed to tutor her and helped in the dining room evenings. The girl was growing up, getting taller and more confident, starting to believe she could be more than her circumstances. 6 months after opening, the Crossroads was profitable. Not wildly so, but enough to sustain itself and pay everyone who worked there. Then Marcus Caldwell showed up. He rode in on a Tuesday afternoon, tied his horse out front, and walked into the dining room like he owned the place. Alara was serving lunch to a family of 4 passing through. She saw him, felt her stomach drop, but finished serving before approaching his table. Mr. Caldwell, what can I do for you? I'd like to speak with you, privately. I'm working. It won't take long. She gestured to the office. They went inside and she closed the door. Say what you came to say. Caldwell looked around the small office. The desk covered in ledgers, the shelves with supplies, the window overlooking the trail. You've built something here. That was the idea. I underestimated you. I thought if I applied enough pressure, you'd break or leave. I was wrong. Is that an apology? It's an acknowledgement. He pulled an envelope from his coat. I'm here with a business proposal. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Don't need to. Whatever you're offering comes with strings I don't want. No strings? I want to invest in the Crossroads, expand it, turn it into something bigger. A proper hotel, maybe a restaurant in Coldridge, your name on both. I'd provide the capital, you'd provide the expertise. Alara stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I'm a businessman, and I recognize opportunity. You're good at what you do. People respect you now, something I didn't think was possible 6 months ago. We could make money together. And in exchange? In exchange, we put the past behind us. No more conflicts, no more fighting. We become business partners and everyone benefits. It was a good offer, smart even. With Caldwell's money and connections, she could build something much bigger than the Crossroads. But it would also mean tying herself to him. Being dependent on his capital, his goodwill, his vision. No, she said. You're refusing without even considering it? I'm refusing because I know what it costs. I built this place with my own hands and my own choices. The second I take your money, it's not mine anymore. It's ours, which means it's really yours. That's not how partnerships work. It's exactly how they work when one partner has all the power. She met his eyes. You've tried to control me from the beginning. First through marriage, then through harassment, then through the contest. Now you're trying to do it through business. The method changes, but the goal stays the same. You want me in a position where you have leverage. That's unfair? Maybe, but it's also true. Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. Then he put the envelope back in his coat. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty of mistakes. This isn't one of them. He stood. I hope you're right. For your sake. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. You can only stay small for so long before someone bigger pushes you out. Then I guess I'll have to stay scrappy. He left without another word. Alara watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, then allowed herself to shake for a full minute before going back to work. That night, Kane came by to check on her. She told him about Caldwell's visit. You turned him down? Yeah. Good. You think I made the right choice? I think you made your choice. That's what matters. But Caldwell's words haunted her. You can only stay small for so long. What if he was right? What if the Crossroads was always going to be limited by her refusal to compromise? She talked to Lena about it while they were cleaning up after dinner. You think I should have taken his offer? No. Why not? Because the second you take his money, he owns you, and you didn't fight this hard just to be owned by someone else. Smart kid. Too smart. What if he's right, though? What if staying independent means staying small? Lena shrugged. Small ain't bad if it's yours. You taught me that. The girl was right. Alara had built something from nothing, created opportunity where there wasn't any, proved that independence was worth fighting for even when it was hard. That was the legacy that mattered, not size or profit or expansion, but the principle underneath that people deserve the right to make their own choices and live with the consequences. Over the next year, the Crossroads grew anyway, not because of investments or partnerships, but through word of mouth and reputation. People came because they'd heard the food was good, the rooms were clean, and the woman who ran it treated everyone fairly. Alara trained more women, giving them skills and wages and confidence. Some stayed long-term. Others moved on to start their own ventures, carrying what they'd learned to new places. Lena finished her education and started helping with the bookkeeping. She had a head for numbers that surprised everyone, and Alara began teaching her the business side of running the Crossroads. You're going to take this over someday, Alara told her. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I want to know it'll be in good hands. The territory changed too. Slowly, gradually, the stranglehold Marcus Caldwell had on Coldridge began to loosen. Other businesses opened that weren't dependent on his approval. The town council started making decisions based on what was good for everyone, not just what Caldwell wanted. It wasn't a revolution, just erosion. The slow wearing away of one man's unchecked influence. Mrs. Brennan visited the crossroads one afternoon, alone and unannounced. She sat in the dining room and ordered tea. Elara served her personally. This is unexpected. I wanted to see what you'd built. And? It's impressive. You should be proud. Thank you. Mrs. Brennan stirred her tea, not drinking it. I've been thinking about our conversation, about choices and safety and what we give up for security. And I think I've been afraid for a long time, afraid to want more than what I have, afraid to question whether the life I chose was the right one. She looked up. You weren't afraid, that's what I envied. I was terrified, still am most days. But you did it anyway. Yeah, I did it anyway. I'm thinking about starting something myself, a small bakery in town. Nothing as ambitious as this, but something mine. Elara smiled. I think you should. Marcus won't like it. Probably not. But that's his problem, not yours. They talked for an hour, not as rivals or enemies, but as two women who'd spent too long living by other people's rules and were finally figuring out how to write their own. When Mrs. Brennan left, she paid for her tea and added an extra $1. For the conversation, it was worth it. 2 years after opening, the Crossroads had become an institution. People planned trips around it, knowing they could get a good meal and a clean bed. Travelers recommended it to each other. Even some people from Coldridge started coming out for Sunday dinner, willing to overlook the past for the promise of Elara's cooking. Kane's investment had paid off 3 times over. He'd used his share of the profits to improve Iron Ridge, hiring more hands, buying better equipment. The ranch was thriving, and so was his partnership with Elara. They'd become something more than business partners over the years. Not romantic, neither of them wanted that, but a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared struggle. They understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. One evening, they sat on the porch of the Crossroads, watching the sun set over the mountains. You ever think about that first day you showed up? Kane asked. Sometimes. I was so desperate. Had nowhere to go, nothing to offer except the ability to cook. And now? Now I've got this place, a business, people who depend on me. It's terrifying and amazing in equal measure. You've come a long way. We both have. He nodded. You know what I think the difference was? Between you and all the other people who came through here looking for a chance? What? You never expected anyone to save you. You just wanted an opportunity to save yourself. Elara thought about that. About the moment she'd said no to Marcus Caldwell and set this whole thing in motion. About the choice to keep fighting instead of accepting exile. About every small decision that had led her here. I don't think anyone can save you except yourself, she said. Other people can help, can give you opportunities, can support you. But the actual work of building a life, that's something you have to do alone. Lonely philosophy. Maybe, but it's honest. Lena joined them on the porch, carrying 3 cups of coffee. She was 14 now, taller than Elara, with the same sharp eyes but less wariness. She'd grown into herself, become confident in a way Elara had never been at that age. You two look serious, Lena said, handing out the coffee. We're being philosophical, Elara replied. Sounds boring. It is. How are the books today? Good. We're turning a profit again this month, better than last month even. You're getting good at this. I had a good teacher. They sat together as the light faded, 3 people who'd found each other through necessity and stayed together through choice. Marcus Caldwell died that winter. Heart gave out suddenly, no warning. The funeral was well attended, people paying respects to a man who'd shaped the territory for better and worse. Elara went. Not to gloat, but to acknowledge the end of something. Caldwell had been her antagonist, the force she'd pushed against to define herself. His death didn't change what he'd done, but it did mark a turning point. At the graveside, his daughter approached Elara. She was young, maybe 20, with her father's features but softer. Miss Voss, I'm Catherine Caldwell. I know who you are. I wanted to thank you. For what? For showing me that there were other ways to live. My father wanted me to marry someone he chose, someone who'd consolidate his business interests. I said no, because I saw you say no and survive. That gave me courage. Alara felt something loosen in her chest. What did your father say? He was angry at first, but eventually he accepted it. I think... Catherine paused. I think watching you build something on your own terms made him realize he couldn't control everything. It changed him. Not completely, but enough. I'm glad. Me too. Catherine hesitated. I'm taking over some of his businesses, trying to run them differently, more fairly. If you ever want to talk about partnerships or collaboration, real collaboration, not what he offered, I'd be interested. I'll think about it. They shook hands, two women who'd each claimed their independence from the same man's influence, and went their separate ways. 5 years after opening, the Crossroads expanded, not through outside investment, but through reinvested profits and careful planning. Alara added more rooms, a larger kitchen, space for small events. She also started a training program, formal now, with certificates and everything. Women came from all over the territory to learn cooking, housekeeping, bookkeeping, basic business skills. They paid a small fee that covered their room and board while learning, then graduated with skills they could use anywhere. Some stayed to work at the Crossroads. Others opened their own businesses. A few became cooks at ranches or hotels throughout the territory. Alara tracked them all, maintaining a network of women who'd passed through her program and were making their own way in the world. It wasn't exactly what she'd imagined that first night at Iron Ridge, exhausted and desperate and determined not to give up. But it was better. It was real. Lena, now 17, was running the Crossroads more and more. Alara had started stepping back, letting the girl take over day-to-day operations while she focused on the training program and expansion planning. You're doing this on purpose, Lena said one evening. Doing what? Making me run everything, testing me. I'm preparing you. There's a difference. For what? For when this is yours. I'm not going to run the Crossroads forever. Where are you going? I don't know yet, but I built this place to create opportunities. Now I want to create more, somewhere else, for someone else who needs it. Lena looked scared. You're leaving? Not yet, not for a while. But someday, yeah. And when I do, I need to know this place will be in good hands. What if I mess it up? Then you'll fix it, same way I did, same way everyone does. Alara put her arm around the girl's shoulders. You're ready for this. You've been ready for a year. I'm just giving you permission to believe it. The last piece of Alara's legacy came unexpectedly. Catherine Caldwell approached her with a proposal to create a foundation that would fund small businesses run by women throughout the territory. They'd provide startup capital, training, mentorship, everything Alara wished she'd had when she started. I want to do this right, Catherine said, not as charity, but as investment. Help women build something sustainable. Why me? Because you've already proven the concept works. You're the blueprint. They worked on it for 6 months, planning every detail. The Crossroads Fund, they called it. A simple name for a simple idea. Give women the tools they needed to build their own futures. When they launched, applications flooded in. Seamstresses wanting to open shops, cooks wanting to start restaurants, teachers wanting to open schools. Women with ideas and determination, but no capital or support. The fund helped 30 women in the first year. Not all of them succeeded, but most did. And even the failures taught lessons that helped others avoid the same mistakes. Alara sat on the board, reviewing applications, providing advice, visiting the businesses they funded. It was exhausting and fulfilling in equal measure, the chance to multiply her impact beyond what she could do alone. 10 years after that first day at Iron Ridge, Alara stood on the porch of the Crossroads and looked at what she'd built. Not just the building, though that was solid and successful, but the network of women she'd trained, the businesses she'd helped start, the proof that independence and community could coexist. Lena ran the Crossroads now. Alara had officially signed it over to her the year before, on the girl's 21st birthday. It was the right time, the right choice. Alara had started working on something new, a traveling training program that went to remote areas where women had even less access to opportunity. It was smaller, harder, less profitable. But it mattered. Kane was still at Iron Ridge, now in his 50s, still running the ranch with the same quiet competence. They had dinner together once a week, maintaining their friendship even as their lives diverged. You ever regret it? He asked during one of those dinners. saying no to Caldwell all those years ago? Never. Not once. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Because the hard parts were mine. I chose them. I lived them. I survived them. That matters more than anything else. He raised his glass. To choices. Choices, she echoed. As the years passed, Ilara's story became something bigger than herself. People told it differently depending on who was listening. Some made her a hero, others a cautionary tale. The truth was somewhere in between. She was just a woman who'd refused to accept the limitations other people tried to impose, who'd worked hard, gotten lucky sometimes, failed plenty, and kept going anyway. The territory changed around her. New towns sprung up, old ones faded. The railroad came through, connecting everything faster and tighter. Progress, they called it, though Ilara wasn't sure it was always progressive. But some things stayed constant. The network of women she'd helped, who helped others in turn. The principle that people deserved the right to choose their own paths. The understanding that strength wasn't about never needing help. It was about asking for it when you did, and offering it when you could. On her 50th birthday, Ilara received a letter from Catherine Caldwell. The Crossroads Fund had helped over 300 women start businesses across 5 territories. The success rate was 70%, higher than any similar program. "You've changed the world," Catherine wrote. "Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily and permanently. That's the kind of change that lasts." Ilara read the letter twice, then filed it away with the others. She'd never been comfortable with praise, still wasn't. But she could acknowledge the truth in it. She'd started with nothing except the refusal to accept what others said she should be. She'd built a life on her own terms, helped others do the same, and left the territory better than she found it. That was enough. More than enough. That evening, she sat alone on the porch of a small cabin she'd built near Iron Ridge, close enough to visit Kane and Lena, far enough to have her own space. The mountains were purple in the fading light. The air smelled like pine and coming rain. She thought about that first night, freezing in the open with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. How desperate she'd been, how close to breaking, and how she'd refused to break. That refusal had made all the difference. Not because it made things easy, it hadn't, but because it put her in control of her own story. She'd come to the frontier looking for work and found purpose, arrived seeking survival and discovered legacy, started alone and built community. The girl who'd said no to Marcus Caldwell would barely recognize the woman she'd become, but she'd recognize the principle underneath. That you didn't need permission to be yourself, didn't need validation to have value. You just needed courage and stubbornness and the willingness to keep walking forward even when every sensible person told you to stop. Ilara had walked forward. Through hostility and hardship, through victories and failures, through all the messy, complicated reality of building a life from scratch. And in the end, she hadn't just survived. She'd thrived. Not because she was special or chosen or blessed with any particular talent beyond determination, but because she'd decided that her choices mattered, her work had value, and her life belonged to her alone. That was the lesson, the legacy, the truth that couldn't be erased or diminished or forgotten. You didn't need to be saved. You needed to be given a chance to save yourself. Everything else was just details. As the stars came out and the temperature dropped and the world settled into night, Ilara Voss sat on her porch and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't and never would be, but because she'd built something worth building, lived a life worth living, and refused to let anyone else write her story. That was all anyone could ask for, and it was more than enough.